call the Transportation Commission meeting for September 18th, 2024 to order. And Ariana, if you'd please read the instructions.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ariana. Aiden, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Juliana Bennett is excused. Dina and Nina Martinez Rutherford, Pepe Barros, Darren Wozniewski, they all are also excused. MGR Govindarajan.
Here.
Barbara Harrington McKinney.
Present.
Ann Kovich.
Here.
Ravi Weber.
Here.
Denise Jeffs.
I'm here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
And Harold Cleaves.
Here.
Okay, thanks. And Bill, you're a voting member tonight because we have a number of absences. Did everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting? Harold?
Move approval of the minutes.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Robbie?
Second. I'm having trouble with my mute and unmute here.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. So please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands, the motion is carried. Aiden, do we have anybody registered for public comment tonight?
We have one person for item 4.
Okay, so nobody for 1?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any disclosures or recusals tonight? Okay, seeing no hands. We have one item on the consent agenda, item number 2. Do we have anybody registered to speak on item number 2?
We do not.
Okay. Does anybody wish that to be separated from the consent agenda? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. So we have item number 2, Legistar 85090, proposed for the consent agenda. Do we have a motion? Robbie?
Move approval.
And Bill?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion at all? Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. So please raise your hand. Okay, see no hands. The motion is carried. All right, we'll move on to item number 3. Presentation on the City of Madison's 2025 operating budget. Obviously, a lot of information we've seen about this topic, and Aldo Govindarajan, I understand you're going to do the presentation this evening. We've as I said, a lot of good information, a lot of good discussion around the community. So excellent that we have an opportunity to see some information, hear some thoughts, and have some discussion tonight.
Yeah, so I'll be presenting today a little bit of a switch up. If you have your harder questions, staff will probably answer them better than I can. We're gonna see if you guys can see my screen.
It's little, but we can see it. Can you make
Okay.
it bigger by chance?
Yes. How's that?
That's better.
Can you go
Thank
to
you.
Can you go to slideshow or full screen?
There you go.
This is about
Much
it.
better.
Since I have a MacBook, I don't have like an actual presenting software like Slideshow, but hopefully this
This
works.
is much better. It's almost full screen.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll be talking a little bit about the slideshow or the budget here. The goal is, as an alder, I've also received tons of these presentations. So I'll be adding in some input that I've received over the past couple months as well. As you guys may know, earlier this Monday, we officially kicked off budget season with Finance Committee starting their hearings and presentations. So we are officially in budget season in full swing now. Cool. So as you guys know, Madison is facing a pretty large budget deficit of $22 million. But for some context first, the city's been growing pretty quickly. By 2025, which is next year, we're expecting to have almost 290,000 people in our population, which is higher than what we expected in 2018. In 2018, we expected about 283,000 as well. The reason this matters so much, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is we have not been keeping up with this rate of increase for population in quite some time. So this unexpected population growth is a fairly big factor in how much of a deficit we're facing. Obviously, we also receive a fair amount of money from the state legislature, but when you break it down by individual and ratio, each Madison individual gets about $29 from the state legislature, meaning we don't really get a whole lot for being the second most populous state in our city in the state. We also are one of the largest economic factors in the state as well. But when you take all of that into consideration, for every $1 that we pay into state taxes, whether that's from MMSD, the city of Madison, or Dane County, we only get about 18 cents for every dollar we put into the state. So a lot of the money that we should be getting from the state government, we really have not been getting, which kind of leads into the factor of why are we in this serious structural deficit. As I mentioned, it's a mix of limited revenues, with us getting about $29 per resident, our city growing much faster than we ever expected, and also leftovers from the COVID pandemic. We did receive a lot of ARPA funding and federal funding from the federal government when COVID first hit, but now that funding will be running out by the end of the year. So we're kind of on our own right now. And again, as I mentioned, the deficit is about $22 million. The pandemic did have quite a lot of impact on our revenues as well. If you look at this graph, in 2025, we projected to be making about $30 to $40 million higher than what we're making right now. So if we had been keeping up with pre-pandemic levels of revenue, we would not be in the situation that we're in right now. So it had quite a big impact on us. And that can be seen much more over here when you count in how much inflation has increased as well. So that big jump from 2021 to 2022, that's both the population increase and the inflation increase that we've seen across the country. Obviously, as we're adding more people to our population base, our needs of service also increases. So this graph shows the population and inflation compared to the levy limit, which is how much we can raise our taxes, our property tax, in proportion to our population. In 2011, the state legislature actually limited how much we can raise our levy limit. So at the start of the graph, you'll see that we're actually at 100%, kind of in equal with the population and CPI. But since that limit has hit, the two lines have kind of diverged, and it got much more worse in the past several years. We've also had like this little misconception that just building more housing and building more buildings in general will help offset the problem. But as we're adding more people to our city and increasing residents, we also have a higher need for service as well. So just adding more construction doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because as the tax rate goes down, capping the levy limit means that as the taxes are going down, the assessed value property also is going up. So we're at the point where we do need to do a little bit more, rather than just relying on the construction taking place. The city's also been doing quite a lot over the last about decade to do what we can with what we have. Since about 2018, we have not been able to fill all the positions that we need to be filled if it kept in pace with the population of our city. Again, you'll see this trend quite frequently going forward, that in 2021, the graphs will be diverging from the pandemic. We should be having about 217 more full-time employees compared to what we have right now, and we just have not been able to keep up. I believe this number was thrown out very early on in the budget discussions. If we did make the full $22 million cut, we would be laying off about 200 something staff members, but we're already about 200 under what we should be if we kept up with population trends. And again, the city has been doing quite a lot since 2011 to meet the levy limit as much as we can and fill in any gaps. This is a lot of information over here, but to condense it, we've tried random various different fees, whether it's like permit fees or building fees, urban forestry charges. We've moved departments and responsibilities over, such as shifting parking enforcement to the parking enterprise, using federal funding, things like that. But there's only so many bandages you can put before the dam blows over. And that's kind of the point that we're at right now with the upcoming referendum. So with a referendum, and again, this is $22 million, we can avoid any significant cuts or the need for more revenue for about another 5 years. This chart over here kind of shows what's going on. The light blue is the property tax referendum if it passes. If it passes, we don't have to really worry about making any cuts or adding any fees for this upcoming 2025 budget. But going forward, we will need to, because we still have the structural deficit. It's not a 1 year problem. And again, the structural problem has been here since 2011. We have had discussions with the state for years now about increasing shared revenue, which is the amount of money we get from the state, or implementing a sales tax, like a 0.5 sales tax, which would impact Madison residents a little bit less compared to other options, since we have people outside of Madison coming in and spending money here anyway. But even if those were implemented, it would take quite some time for it to actually show and be impacting our budget. For example, if we implemented a sales tax, it wouldn't really impact our city budget until 2027. So this is kind of the best case scenario that the city's finance department has come up with right now. The green that you see here is the balance fund, which is, I believe, the rainy day fund. We will start going, if the referendum passes, we will start going through that in 2026 with the next year's budget. And that, along with new special charges and any efficiencies and additional revenues that we might get, will bring us to about 2030, at which point we will start meeting another structural deficit. That gives us about 5 years to work with the state legislature and work with any other entities that impact us to try to fix the problem in a structural manner, rather than just trying to scrummage what we can, which we've kind of been doing the past decade, as I mentioned. This is a similar map without the referendum. So again, just to compare, in 2030 is where we would meet the structural deficit again with a referendum. Without a referendum, we meet that much sooner in 2027. In 2025, next year, if the referendum does not go through, we will likely have to raise special charges. We'll have to try to meet and get new revenue, and also use the rainy day fund a little bit, which is the green fund balance. Of course, we're also going to have to make permanent cuts to services, whether this be some of the many services that the city offers. I'll get into that in a little bit. But we do get into that unaddressed funding that we need to fill much sooner than 2030. This is another way to kind of look at the same chart. If we go through the referendum, we get the 22 million. It is consistent. We don't have to keep raising the levy limit every year. It just stays that way going forward. So we will have to meet a lot less money of unaddressed money, if that makes sense, going forward compared to if the referendum does not pass. And again, that'll be on the November 5th ballot. So you can see here that we are roughly over here, if you can see my mouse, but we have about 21% of our general fund or rainy day fund filled up right now. So if we apply about 5 million to it every year into our budget, if the referendum fails, that's what the red line here shows. This is the highest that the rainy day fund has been since 1995. And it's been pretty healthy. The higher we can keep this, generally speaking, the higher I believe our tax rate will be from the AAA fund rate that we get from some agency that's blanking my mind right now. I apologize.
The AAA bond rating.
Yes, that's what it is. Thank you, Ann.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And again, in essence, as we're borrowing money, the higher rating we have, the less of a tax rate that we have to pay back when we are borrowing that money. So as we're using money from the rainy day fund, the higher we'll have to pay back. And we do end up borrowing money frequently as a city. This is another way to kind of see that the state legislature is unlikely to step in anytime soon. And if they do, the money will not be available for quite some time. When it comes to shared revenue instead of sales tax, the earliest we can see that becoming available is 2026 and the sales tax in 2027. Any other fiscal state relief is going to come 2029 or 2030. So another big thing when it comes to this is the only reason we're able to kind of look forward into this and be optimistic is with the new legislative maps that were passed earlier this year. Obviously, the Assembly will be a much closer margin going forward, but the Senate's not really up for discussion very much when it comes to the amount of change until 2026. Madison's relationship with the state legislature has not always been super friendly, so when it comes to getting aid from the state, it has typically been much more difficult than easier. This is the potential cuts that I was talking about earlier. I'll just try to highlight a couple of the transportation related ones over here, except one I do want to highlight here is reducing the number of poll workers. These are really impactful cuts that we are looking. And it'll come to find it. These are currently proposed by the agencies themselves. So just to talk process a little bit, the mayor will be looking at this and then deciding some in her executive budget, and then it'll go to the finance committee and the alders for us to make any amendments. But these are all quite important services that we have tried to get for the past several years. CARES is a very new program that's been helping a lot of people, but we might have to make cuts, there might be cuts to several boards and commissions that we currently have. And then over here, I believe is the much more transportation related stuff. We'll be potentially cutting the daytime test team. We might be reducing the amount of crossing guards. Metro and Transit has proposed cutting services on late nights or just Sundays or just Saturdays. These are the kind of options that we're looking at to meet that roughly 6 million cut if the referendum does not go through. This will have an impact on quite a lot of people. It also will transfer into the capital budget eventually, where alders will be pressured by our constituents and also like our fiscal responsibilities to not borrow as much money as we could theoretically, I suppose, to make sure, which then correlates to maybe not funding Green Streets as much and other various projects that we see in this committee. So on the November 5th ballot, this is how the actual referendum will look like. Voting in Madison, this is going to be from the third from the bottom, I believe. It's pretty confusing. And on the side here, it kind of showcases how to break it up. But again, the way I've been simplifying and explaining this to people is if you want to maintain the levels of services that we have right now, you would vote yes, and otherwise you would vote no. And then as an alder, I'm not able to tell anyone which way to vote or not, and I don't think you as committee members can either. But this is the referendum question that council approved either a couple months ago or weeks ago. Just the impact, we spoke about this briefly earlier. This is kind of how it might impact you. So for wherever you live, whether it's an apartment complex or whether you live in a single family house, for every $100,000 of that building's worth, you'll be seeing a $5 increase per month. So again, I think the average home in Madison is going to be seeing about $20 a month. And I see here on the right side, the average cost for a renter. Again, that is very dependent on how many units are in your building, how many people live in your apartment, whether the landlord is going to put off those costs to you. So that part, we're still working on getting more concrete data, but it's much easier to figure out how it'll impact the average homeowner. And again, I'm sure you've kind of gotten the gist throughout this presentation, but this is much more than just a Madison problem. 58% of in the past several years, multiple Wisconsin municipalities have gone to referendum, have asked their voters, hey, can we raise your own property taxes in order to continue the services that we've been providing? And when so many of them are asking across the state, it showcases that it's not just a Madison problem, it's been a state problem. I believe this upcoming November 5th, this also impacts school districts, as you know. With this upcoming November 5th election, exactly half of the school districts in the entire state of Wisconsin would have gone to referendum because of the lack of state funding. So yeah, about 58 historically have passed in the past 2 years when it comes to municipalities, and I don't believe that includes school districts. Here's a little bit about the budget timeline. We are roughly over here right now. The capital budget was released last week, and it's online, but the operating budget is the one which we're really discussing. That's the one where the referendum is really impacted. And again, just a quick differential, the capital budget is more so the projects we are doing, one-time funding, and the operating budget is salaries and reoccurring funds that happen consistently every year. The council will be voting only about a week after Election Day to adopt our budget. Our wonderful finance department is basically putting together two different budgets. One if the referendum passes, one if the referendum fails. And truthfully, we don't know which way it's going to go right now. So props to the finance department on doing their hard work. But I can try to answer however many questions people might have. I can try my best, but that is about it. And there's more information over here at that link over there. But yeah.
And I did ask Aiden to put those links right directly into Legistar so that people can find additional information more easily. Aiden, I don't believe we have anybody registered to speak on this item. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. So comments or questions for Alder Govindarajan or staff? Harold.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I've seen parts of it before, but yeah, it was good to have it all in one place. Two questions. When it comes to the fees that were mentioned on one of the slides, I think there were like 3 different fees mentioned that are potentially or definitely going to be raised as part of the budget. Why those? Why not others? I'm thinking transportation-wise. I mean, we have the vehicle registration fee, we have the residential parking permit fee. I know some fees are limited to how far they can only cover the cost of the program to administer, but I know, for example, the residential parking permits, we are under that limit. So I was just curious about the fees piece.
Alder, you're muted. There you go.
Is this the slide you were talking about? Just want to make sure I have it pulled up right.
I think it came earlier. I have, see, I have it open here too. I think it had a hotel room and a.
I mean, realistically, I think if it comes to the council floor, I guess any of us, and the referendum had failed, any of the alders, I suppose, can make a motion to increase any fee. But we're also going to want to take a look at it historically. Like in 2020, I don't know, 2020, I'm just looking at this first. We raised the special forestry charge. Maybe that's not one we want to touch again because we just recently touched it. Maybe we can look at the room tax because the last time we did that was 2017, 2018-ish. And we also want to, like, me personally, I'm just speaking for myself now. I would want to see, like, who was impacted most by these charges, okay? If it's impacting the most, like the low income people the most, then maybe I would want to stay away from that and try to make sure that we're trying to be equitable in where we're trying to get our sources of funding from. So I don't know if any of these specific fees that are proposed are solidified or set in stone at all. I don't think they are, but yeah. Does that
Okay.
answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful context. The other
Harold, can I just ask something that I think might help there? Aren't some of those fees limited in what the proceeds can be used for? Like the room tax, you can't just take that money and use it for anything. That's just one example. And how fees impact residents isn't, relative to, how wealthy they are or not. It's just a flat fee that affects everybody. But the proceeds can't always just be used for anything. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the room tax, it's just for like it can go for tourism related things. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I don't think I think it's far more complicated. I don't have all the information, Harold, but I've heard some discussion about that. So Ruben or somebody else who's on, I don't know if you can add any more about that before Harold goes on. Go ahead, Ruben.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly correct. Transportation fees have to go towards transportation costs. Room tax has to go towards tourism costs. So, and all fees that you want to create or raise will be a political decision. And so they would also have to actually get through council and the community's voice, right? So obviously continuing discussion, but these are the ones that and there's also things that we can't charge fees for based off state law as well. So not all things are available to us.
Thanks, Ruben. Yeah, I didn't remember all the details. What else did you have, Harold?
Yeah, totally different topic. Assuming, and I hope that's not the case, the referendum fails, would we have the ability to put another referendum on the ballot next year or in any of the future years?
Hypothetically, and I am no lawyer, so if there are any, and I'm wrong, please jump in. But hypothetically, I've been told yes. We can immediately do it in the April ballot if we wanted to. But again, that'll be a much more putting a ballot on or a referendum on the ballot. That's always a political question as well. So it takes that willpower to do so.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Other comments or questions for Alder Govindarajan and her staff? Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I had two questions. So you had in the referendum language, it says that we are limited to, I think, 2.9%, increase in the levy, 2.97. I think we can increase the levy based on new growth or new development. Is that the 2.97% that is in there? I mean, is that how much our new construction has been? Or is there something else that I'm missing that maybe we're allowed to increase it by, say, inflation? I think there was something about
Yeah.
new development you were able to raise it based on new development.
I'll let Ruben take this. He has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruben.
Sure, and yeah, that's a really complicated question that I don't know I can fully answer. But we used to be able to raise it based off inflation, and then when the Walker years, they took that ability away from us. So it's tied very closely to our net new construction
Okay.
around that 2.9%.
So the 2.97% is probably how much our new construction has been, and that's what's limiting it. Okay. I was just trying to figure out where the new construction came into our restrictions on the levy. Then I did have one other question. And if we go back to the slides on what would happen in the future with the referendum, it looks like we are using part of the rainy day fund, even if the referendum passes. Does that keep a good balance in the rainy day fund, this projection? Or are we drawing it down? It just takes longer to draw it down.
I think it does take longer to draw it down. This graph shows it a little bit better. So the red is the projected. It would go up a little bit in 2025 and then go pretty much towards 15%. From what we've heard at finance, we don't want to go below that 15%. At that rate, that's where it's going to impact our AAA bond rating. So we can go about 5 years before we get to that rate, I believe.
Okay, so this chart here is if the referendum does pass. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Otherwise, we'll run out of rainy day fund much sooner.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Those were my two questions. I just wanted to kind of clarify those in my own mind. Thank you.
Yep.
I don't see any other hands up. I just wanted to make a comment about, we're talking about the operating budget here, but when I see I was a senior credit officer at a bank, and, looking at the impact of having a negative impact on the city's AAA bond rating, it impacts the city's access to credit. It impacts the city's access to lower rate credit. It potentially raises rates on existing city credit. So, one of the things Alder Govindarajan talked about was the spillover effect on the capital side of the budget. And a lot of our transportation projects are funded in the capital budget. And if we use up all the rainy day fund and really mess up our AAA bond rating, it's going to make it harder for the city to borrow money, and it's going to be more costly for the city to borrow money. And that will impact our ability to fund capital projects as well. So that's one thing that, as a finance person, I look at that, and that city, that AAA bond rating is really valuable and is really important in my mind for us to retain. I think the quality of life here in Madison is, it's why I moved to Madison, why I've lived here for, over 40 years and almost 50 years now. And I think that's what my goal is to see us maintain that quality of life. So other comments or questions? Harold.
Sorry, one more. In conversations about this with other people who have read less about this, one theme I have heard brought up when we talk about the potential cuts that need to be made, people make the argument, oh, of course, the city is proposing to cut the popular stuff. Of course, they're saying they're going to close the pool and reduce the traffic enforcement team and close libraries and all of that. But there's all this other stuff that they could cut, and people usually don't specify what that other stuff is because probably they don't know. But what do you, Alder Govindarajan or city staff, respond to that?
I mean, again, just speaking for myself here, if people are aware of other things that we could potentially cut, I would love to hear what they are. Because I have so many binders next to me right now of the operating budget from the past 2 years, trying to find random things that we could cut that don't define the city as what it is, or they're not considered a core function of the city, you know? But $22 million is a lot of money. It's about 200 something staff members, and that's a lot of services. I think the way it was first described is that's pretty much the entire streets division, you know? So it, we're not cutting things just, or we not potentially, again, we don't want to be cutting things just because they're popular or anything, but we're cutting things because we don't really have a choice, potentially. And no one, especially like, I do not want to be taking these hard votes eventually in mid-November. I promise you that. But it's just a crappy situation to be in that we're kind of forced into.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Well, we really appreciate having the information because I don't know about anybody else, but I get questions from people about this particular issue. And so I've been doing a lot of reading on my own, and it's very helpful to have it put into a summary like this, so that, you know, we have the information at our fingertips. And, you know, kudos to all of you alders working on this and staff for, I mean, it's hard enough to put together one budget, but to put together 2 operating budgets because we don't know what's going to happen, that's just monumental task. So thanks to everybody for all the hard work that you're doing. So any other comments or questions on this important topic? And if anybody does have questions, where would you suggest that they send them?
I'd just say the finance department. They're probably the most like technical, like knowledgeable to answer the specific questions.
Okay, so to Bill Schmidtke or something?
Yeah, Dave.
Okay. All right, very good. Anything last minute here before we move on? Okay, thanks very much, Alder, and thanks, Ruben. Next, we have crossing guards at middle school. And Aiden, I believe I heard we have someone registered to speak on this item.
Yep, we have one person.
Okay, so we'll go through Renee's presentation and then we'll hear from the public and then we'll have our discussion. So, hi, Renee, thanks. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen here.
Not there yet, Renee.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Nope. No, it says that you've started screen sharing.
All right. Well, it is now giving me a very unstable computer that won't let me do anything. So I'll just start talking. I think everyone here knows, but just in case, I'm Renee Calloway. I'm the Assistant Director of Traffic Engineering. And now I have no idea what's going on. Can you let me switch this?
Yes, we can see it now.
All right. It went from you locked up to working. So excellent. So Assistant Director of Traffic Engineering. I know for many of you on the committee, you maybe have been here for the last 2 presentations on crossing guard policy, with one last fall focused on middle school issues when the school switched the start times on the east side. Then this summer, we began our kind of journey at looking at the policy through a racial equity, social justice lens, but we did talk a little bit about the middle school and our policy then. So I tried to kind of bring some new things in tonight to help us talk about what is a very challenging issue, because I think everyone here, like me, is really interested in kids having that ability to walk and bike to school as much as possible. Also very interested in safety. But, obviously you're going to be mindful of the budget right now. And you will have seen on that presentation that one of the cuts that would be on the table is a reduction in the size of our crossing guard program. we not the full elimination, but around the edges. So that is something to keep in mind. I did want to go through the history just a little bit because I think there can be some confusion about it. The program has been around, as far as I can tell, for an incredible amount of time. Some of the documents I found that had tried to type up the history did say it started in the 1950s. By the 1960s, there was a feeling that there needed to be some criteria. It wasn't until 1970 that there was some more work on that, and it transferred that decision-making around policy and criteria for crossing guards to the Board of Education. And then in 72 was when the school district went to the K through 5, 6 through 8. It was a different arrangement, kind of K through 6 was elementary school. And at that time, my understanding is when that decision was made that K through 5 would be who the crossing guard program was from. And then in the 70s, again, there was the Common Council was doing the criteria, and they felt that they needed to adopt it themselves. And so in the mid 70s, they did that. And it looks like from what was documented that by the late 70s, the Board of Education had moved all decision-making related to the program to the Transportation Commission that existed at that time. And around that same time, the school superintendent sent a letter saying that the budget would also be the city's responsibility. I have no documentation that says what the school might have been paying, but it seems like from that letter that there was some payment that the school made. And then in 1980, new criteria were approved in the 80s and then in the 90s. And then in 2015-16, our current criteria was once again reviewed for changes, and some changes were made. And then, as I said, we've started down this road to potentially make some more updates to the policy with that focus, particularly on racial equity and social justice that we feel needs to be better reflected in the policy. I really wanted to share that to say that it has made changes. There have been different players in the policy. But right now, we continue to have a policy for elementary schools. We do get requests from time to time from middle school principals to study locations, but we do have always let them know that they do not qualify, but that we will work with them on other potential solutions, such as reviewing issues that they're seeing with walking and biking. There are 32 elementary schools within the school district. 29 of the schools have a city-provided crossing guard. And then Shorewood Hills has a staff person for Shorewood Elementary because it is not located within the city. I should say that Fitchburg does also participate financially in the Leopold Elementary School because Post Road is half city, half Fitchburg. But that is the only one. And then we staff one Middleton Cross Plains Elementary that is located fully within the city of Madison. There are also 12 MMSD middle schools. 7 are located adjacent or close enough to an elementary school. And in 22-23, there were 4 schools that benefited from having an elementary school crossing guard. Then in 23, at the start of the year, there were 6 due to time changes in the school district. But then there were new time changes, so there were only 3 after last November when the East and North middle schools went to the later start time. And then this year, we do have Badger Rock Elementary. It has some limited benefits due to its location near Southside, but it has kind of a unique schedule, which I'll talk about a little bit. Middle schools do start now, except for Badger Rock, at 9 a.m., with elementary schools now all starting at 7:35 or 8:25. Schools have what we call a soft landing, which is basically, I would call that the breakfast time. and that's 15 minutes before official start time. So we do like to serve that soft landing time to ensure the kids who are coming for the breakfasts are getting the benefit of the crossing guard. Middle schools are dismissing now, as you may remember, at 4:25, Tuesday through Thursday. Elementary schools are dismissing either at 2:30 or 3:20. So this is a pretty big shift. Originally, we did think that the school district pre-COVID had been thinking of shifting the middle schools to later, but not as late as they are now. But we also see that with this shift, I think I saw an article that said they're getting 95% performance from the bus company on time, which was an issue at the beginning of last school year. And then, as I mentioned, Badger Rock has its own kind of special schedule. They have the same schedule every day, 8:20 arrival, 2:20 dismissal. So there is some alignment with the dismissal times, Tuesday through Friday only, but our crossing guard there is working the Southside elementary times, but with that 2:20 dismissal, they are getting some benefits part of the week. Now, typically for our crossing guards, if you have that 8:25 school start time, they're going to work either 7:35 to 8:35 or 7:40 to 8:40. We do guarantee a 1-hour shift for our crossing guards to make it worth their time to come out. I will say that's not the case everywhere. Verona has a very short shift for their crossing guards, which are through a private company. But we do hire their staff away sometimes because of that 1-hour guarantee of work. It's just the reality. It's more worthwhile. We do base that exact schedule, which is a little varied on, are they right at the school, a little further away? If it's a school that we see has tons of tardiness, then we might go to that 8:40 time to capture the tardy students. But we want to make sure if it's a school where that crossing has a lot of the people coming for that breakfast time, that we're capturing them. We also have some intersections where we put a lot of cones. They might have some complexities where we're, putting out cones just to help alert drivers to our presence. And that takes a little time, especially if there are, it's like a 5-leg intersection or it has a longer traffic cycle at a light. And we also like to have just a little bit of room in case there's a unexpected delay. We want to make sure our crossing guards can be there by the time that first student arrives. So a lot goes into kind of setting what that shift looks like. This is where our crossing guards are currently located. As I said, most schools, but not all, have a crossing guard. So some of the things we've been doing, and you heard about, we kind of are doing the same things on the west side that we were doing on the east side. And we've been doing some of these things again on the east side, like getting those mobile speed displays out in our school zones to remind people to slow down. We've been checking all of the crosswalk lights, knowing with the time change coming that the kids will be getting out closer to dark. Want to make sure if they need upgraded that we're getting that into the queue and getting that done, especially since some of our lights are on MG&E poles, so we need them to schedule the work for us. We've been out assisting with educating students. We've been particularly at the schools first that had crossing guards in the past, just doing some education at the beginning of the school year with them, making sure they understood what they need to do, and then doing some observations to see, what kind of issues might we need to address. We also already started just today working with the schools to get our bike lights and our light up armbands out to schools, and knowing that time change will be here before we know it. We've been doing some signage with some safety reminders, such as reminders to look up from your phone, to press the flashing beacon light or the pedestrian button if that's needed. And so just reminding the kids and the adults that are with them how to stay safe. We have a good partnership with the traffic enforcement safety team, and I know they have been out some. My staff have said that they've seen them out. And, just continuing to reinforce safe driving in school zones. Also, we work closely with the Wisconsin Bike Fed. They actually have a Safe Routes to School program that's funded through some transportation alternative program funds, and we work super closely with them on their educational programs, both in elementary schools doing pedestrian education and doing bike education in middle schools. And then they've just recently started a high school program. So we've been working with them to kind of flesh out what that will look like. We also have our school safety committee that does safety reviews at schools. And we have, as many of you know, got funding to do a Safe Routes to School planning project that's starting this semester. We'll ultimately be able, we have funding to update the school travel plans and prioritize improvements at about half the schools. And so we'll be creating some metrics to select those schools. And then, as you all know, we come back here to fund infrastructure improvements through the Safe Streets Madison program. And we have been making a number of improvements throughout the school district. Of course, MMSD does things themselves. A lot of schools have staff that are out monitoring arrival and dismissal, supporting students. I happened to need to go to one of our satellite offices, and I went by Henderson Elementary, and a couple of the crosswalks where we don't have crossing guards, they did have staff out. And I know a number of schools have staff out, also like just ensuring safety, like at the buses. There are, there's at least one school, I don't know if we have more than one this year, that has staff that are supporting a walking school bus up at Lakeview Elementary. And of course, they're helping us by reinforcing safe behavior throughout the whole community and helping us, identify concerns so that we can work collaboratively on those. So things that we could do to better support middle schools. Obviously, we could put a priority on infrastructure improvements at middle schools, knowing that they are more likely to be starting to walk independently. And we could, look at what are the things that come out of our planning project, and we could decide that's going to be something we put an emphasis on. I think all of our partners could increase educational resources, making it sure that everyone is getting good education on walking and biking safety. We've talked about this before, kind of that continuum of education starting in elementary and moving through high school and making sure everyone understands all of their mobility options and how to be safe. Obviously, resources related to driver safety in school zones is something that we could do more on. And something that I also think is important is just caregivers and modeling safe behavior, and ensuring that it doesn't look like when you reach a certain age that is an adult, then you can throw it all out the window. We could obviously continue or even increase traffic enforcement efforts near our schools. We could also have a middle school crossing program of one sort or another. It could be a city program. It could be an extension of what we're doing with elementary schools. It also could be run by one of our partners, either as volunteers or a paid crossing guard program. It could be something that staff is being paid to do a real crossing guard, not just kind of monitoring a crosswalk. We could have more walking school buses or bike trains, but more focused on older students. I think the model is really a bit focused on elementary schools, and that's where we tend to see those kinds of programs. And we could have staff or volunteers just at more of the crosswalks, reinforcing safe behavior and keeping an eye on what's happening and being those eyes on a crosswalk. And of course, if we have areas that are particularly hazardous, there may be opportunities to review them for busing. That's obviously something that MMSD would need to do. But obviously, I want to put that on the table as an option to better support middle schools as well, because we do hear about busing issues all the time as well. So since the beginning of school, we have had staff out doing some observations. The first week was focused more on talking to them and whoever was with them, if it was parents or other caregivers. And then we did want to do just some observations of what do they do if someone's not there, kind of telling them to be safe, telling them to look up, telling them to push the button for the flashing beacon. And what we've seen so far this year is the kids are doing a good job. They're waiting for the walk light. They're pushing the buttons for the flashing beacons. We actually had a location where we did have a lot of problems with the kids doing diagonal crossing to try to avoid waiting for the crossing guard to tell them that they could cross. And so far this year, we have not seen that. It might be something that would happen, crop up later in the year, but we worked a lot with the school to reinforce with the students to not do the diagonal crossings, to cross in the crosswalk. Tends to be that the middle school kids, not 100%, but most of them are riding in the street. It was often an issue where we might get complaints that our crossing guard wasn't out, and the kids were already crossing. But that was because the kids were in the street. When they got the green light, they would go, but the crossing guard might not have noticed and got out there in place with their paddle up yet. Unfortunately, we did observe some adults crossing with their children who were not being safe, but we did see some who came out. They were, at the beginning of the week, they were educating their kids. Then they were observing their kids to make sure that they were crossing safely. So we did see some adults who were doing that. And we've seen less adults coming with the kids now that school is in. I guess we're in the third week, wherever we are in September. But unfortunately, a lot of our behavior that was unsafe was done by adults, either adults who dropped their kids off or adults even with their kids. So that's unfortunate. And as mentioned, our safety enforcement team from MPD has been out making stops. All right. So I want to talk a little bit, because I know that a lot has been brought up about how we should have a middle school crossing guard program. So I wanted to take that hypothetical down that road, and what would it take to do that? So I think if we were to do that, we would obviously have to update our policy, because it's very clear to me now that it's for elementary school. So we would need to also clarify if middle schools would have a different set of criteria. Like maybe they would need to have a higher hazard rating for some older students than for younger students, or if we would use the same one. And then we would need to approve those locations the way we do elementary school locations. Of course, we would need funding. So each location, it's about $7,500 to have a permanent guard per location for the year. We would also need to have substitute guards specifically for those later times, because our current substitute guards who cover vacations and illnesses, they make a commitment to the hours of elementary school time. And so being available for those larger periods, there might be some who would be willing, but many probably would not be able to. And then we would need to think about how to have supervision during that time period for the evening, for the later afternoon, because right now our supervisors are done by that point in the day. We would also need to hire staff. We do have a seniority-based sort of system, so we would need to offer the locations and times to other people. Many of the people, though, are pretty happy in their locations and their times, so staffing, we would need to staff up to do this, and we are not even fully staffed for this school year yet. We're really getting by having our substitute guards work full-time for us right now, with the idea that we just need them to, be willing to do this until we can bring more people on. But it is pretty typical at the start of the year. We had a ton of applications this year, but not maybe even half of those people actually came to the interviews. Then with the people who offered the job, it's maybe not even half who come to the training. After they learn more about the job, they decide it's not for them. And then we always have people who work a week and decide that they don't like the job, right? It's more steps. It's more inconvenient than they expected. And, we always lose some people who have unexpected health problems. And we've also lost some people who got better jobs with better hours. So, that's the reality. So that part there is definitely tricky. And we would need to decide, if we have openings, are we prioritizing? How are we prioritizing? Would it be at elementary schools and we just fill middle schools as we were able? And then I feel need to have a plan in place if the start times were adjusted again. We do not control what time school starts. And since this since the program moved into traffic engineering and after it was in the beginning of 2021, the start times have changed a lot over that period of time. And we've had to adapt and ask our crossing guards to adapt. So I think that, you know, the more we're expanding, we would need to really think that through. Also, we would need to figure out the afternoon support. Our crossing guards start very early in the morning at 6 a.m. to get the sick calls and get people deployed out to cover any vacancies and to deal with any emergencies that might arise. So they're going to be done before the afternoon shift is calling in sick and knowing that they can't make it. So we would need to figure out how to do that. And it could have additional costs as well, depending on how many we have. So I put together a budget. I'm thinking, you know, we have 12 middle schools, but Badger Rock, you know, it's unclear if with their kind of unique situation, would we or would we not have a crossing guard there? But let's say each school, each of the other 11 qualified. Well, that's $82,500 per year for the crossing guards. But, you know, middle school kids come from a much wider array of locations. So in the afternoons, it could be that many schools might qualify for 2 locations, depending on our policy, which brings us up more to $150,000. Let's say we have some need for, you know, sick time and vacation time. Obviously, if this is all new employees, that might be less than $8,000 because they would not have that much sick time and vacation time built up. We'd need some supplies for these new guards, and maybe we would have, you know, just 60% crossing guard supervisor, or maybe we would have like our current ones that work 85%. But let's say on the low end, we're talking like $140,000 if we wanted to really have a crossing guard program. We wanted to evaluate our crossings. Or maybe we would set the policy very high to qualify for a crossing guard at middle school. Maybe then we would only have 5 locations and we could get that cost down. So it kind of depends on ultimately what we would have as a policy to qualify. You know, obviously we could reduce that cost too by eliminating some of our elementary school crossing guard locations, maybe the ones with the lowest performance. We would cut those and we would just have a higher standard overall. And I should say that we do have some funding through the Transportation Alternatives Program, where we will be looking at our elementary school locations where people live in relation to walk zones in our current locations, with the idea that maybe there are locations we should be covering for elementary school that we aren't. So, you know, that could impact as well, you know, the total number of locations that we have and that we might want to reduce. So I think there's a lot to consider there as well if we want to start a middle school crossing guard program. And then I wanted to look a little bit more. I had some examples this summer of crossing guard programs, but we were looking at kind of the overall policy, racial equity, and social justice. So I tried to look a little bit for some examples or just around the middle school issue. So I found that Ann Arbor, Michigan, they do have middle school crossing guards. They have 2 schools that are K through 8. They do have the start end time for all grades, but there are crossing guards at those 2 schools. They do have 1 school that's a 6 through 8 only. It does have a crossing guard. They don't necessarily have a really strict policy, I think, but they did have one. And interestingly enough, they had a posting that they are still hiring for this school year as well. I think some of their openings were at middle school, the K through 8 locations. They actually have their staff work 2 40-minute shifts per day, but get paid for a full 4 hours. Even with that, they're still hiring. So just thought I'd throw that in as an interesting tidbit. Austin, they're elementary school only. Dallas, Texas, also elementary school only. Philadelphia, it was the K through 5 elementary schools. Lawrence, Kansas, though, did include middle schools. most of their locations, though, you have to have a minimum of 40 students, which is much higher than what we have, except for a few what they would consider their most hazardous locations where 10 or more would qualify. You do have to be on what they determine to be a designated safe routes to school route. If it's not on one of their designated routes, then they don't do the middle schools there, or they don't do crossing guards at all. And then interestingly, Boulder, which we always talk about a lot because it's also very bike and walk friendly, they have a fully volunteer crossing guard program that is run by the school district. So completely kind of different model. All right. Then I just, we had the two other conversations. So I just have the link here. Was in there in case you wanted to look back at it for any reason. And that is it. I tried to cover some new and different things as we kind of dive into this issue, which is, of course, very important, I think, to the community and very important to everyone here because walking and biking is really something that we really want to forward more at our schools and really appreciated the support on that topic here. All right. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Renee. Sure. Let's hear from the public and then we'll have conversation about it.
All right. So we have David Armiak of Phillip Lane supports and wishes to speak.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
All right, great. Thanks for allowing me some time to speak here. I noticed that my organization is up there, that I'm not representing my organization. I'm here as a citizen and a resident of Midvale Heights. I have to say it was really frustrating to have to sit through this presentation. Kids nowadays have to deal with all kinds of violence and safety issues from, guns in schools, fights in schools. And, on top of it now, they have to, here in Midvale Heights, attempt to cross a very busy intersection at Seago and Mineral Point. So there were a lot of discussion about costs, costs in the budget, to reduce the budget of this program, which is very much needed, not only for elementary kids, but for middle school kids. I see that the aquatics program might get cut. Kids deserve, to learn how to swim safely and be safe around water. Adults make these decisions, but kids, unfortunately, are the ones that have to deal with the consequences. So I'm just going to put that out there. I wasn't going to say that, but anyways, I'm just really disappointed in the city's reckless decision to not extend the shift to crossing guards at the intersection of Mineral Point and Seago for the current school year. We received news that the city would not pay for crossing guards at the intersection to cover middle school students using this intersection to get to school safely 2 weeks before school started. Our principal is new. He apparently was not supposed to do that, we found out, because two other middle schools that lost their crossing guards on the side of town did not see that in their newsletters. But we were able to find out, and it forced our family and many other families on this side of Mineral Point to juggle our work schedule so we can drive our kids to school now that we do not have crossing guards to ensure that our kids can cross safely. Many families on this side of Mineral Point have worked together to talk about options, to reach out to our alders, to reach out to people in the transportation department, to reach out to the school, to ask for the crossing guards to be reinstated, and have only received pretty much copy and pasted answers, except for the principals, which have told us that the decision is out of their hands, that it is the city's responsibility. The police have also said that it's the city's responsibility. When I responded to the email from the city asking if a safety study had been done at the intersection, I received no response. So I asked this committee, was a safety study done at Mineral Point and Seago before this decision was made to extend the time that the crossing guards who are there to no longer be there this year? What has changed from last year to this year? Is there evidence to show that this intersection is now safer than it was last year, so that our kids can cross safely? Those of us with kids crossing at that section would love to see it. We have not been able to find that information. We've tried and asked a number of folks and have not been able to get it. But I'll tell you this, I've lived in Midvale Heights for 5 years. And in my experience driving on Mineral Point Seago, Drivers regularly do not obey signage, and speeding is a common occurrence. A perfect example of this is the new no turn on red signs that were installed at the intersection a couple of days before school started. This is a great idea in theory, but not when there are no crossing guards or law enforcement present. On the first day of school, while waiting at the intersection on Seago, my daughter and I, in our car, witnessed 5 cars turn on red onto Mineral Point, forcing students to dodge the vehicles. At the same moment, a girl on a bike moved diagonally through the intersection. It was amazing that nobody got hurt. If you don't want to take my word on it that speeding and obeying signage are a problem at and around the intersection, please talk with Madison Police. Over the summer, I spoke with a policeman on Mineral Point trying to catch speeders, and he said people regularly go 45 miles per hour on the busy road. Did the city consult with law enforcement before making this decision to pull crossing guards for middle schoolers at the intersection? I still have not heard anything from the city on this. We also tried to get the media to pay attention. We were able to get some stories out there. And one was ABC News, the local ABC News affiliate, which did a great job in interviewing folks. And when that aired, I mean, it was really just like sort of icing on the cake. But there were right before our story was featured, there was a news report of a woman or a person, actually, I don't know if it was a woman, but who was hit by somebody on Mineral Point by a driver who ignored a no turn on red sign. Upon inquiring, we found out that was actually a Hamilton staffer. So did anybody speak with the Hamilton staffer who got hit about how safe it is to cross?
David, I think your time is up.
Okay. I didn't know I had a time limit.
Yeah, it's 3 minutes for each speaker. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go over time. I can stop there.
Thank you. Very interesting comments. Are there questions for the registrant? Alder Harrington McKinney?
Thank you very much. One of your questions, David, I believe you were asking, was there any kind of a study done of the area? Were you specifically looking at crash analysis? Could you just, for a couple of minutes, just expand on that statement?
Yes. So last year we had crossing guards. This year we do not. So you would think that if you were, if the crossing guards were removed, it was because the intersection was deemed to be safe for kids to cross on their own. So parents in the area have been trying to locate the safety study that must have been done of the intersection that determined that crossing guards were no longer needed and that this year middle schoolers could cross safely. So that would be, how many tickets are taken, speeding tickets or crashes or people hit by cars like this staffer from Hamilton Middle School where our kids go to school, which is, is very, very traumatizing for kids to know that you could be hit and put in the ICU when trying to cross to go to school, right? So we're just looking for any kind of safety study that shows, this is a much safer intersection as it was last year. So we didn't need the crossing guards to stay another half hour because it's safer. And I haven't seen it, and nobody else has either.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for the registrant? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anybody else, Aiden?
No, we do not.
Okay. Comments or questions for Renee? Robbie?
Yeah, I'm curious, did the start time change at Hamilton? Is that why there was a crossing guard during the time middle school students were walking last year and not this year? I'm just wondering why.
Yeah.
Because we know we've never done middle school crossing guards.
Yeah, it's exactly like what happened with last year, where particularly it was most noticeable at O'Keefe, which had aligned previously. and then it no longer aligned after this shift to the later start time. So that's the same for the schools on the west side that had benefited from a crossing guard. With the new shift in time, they're not benefiting from the elementary school crossing guard being there anymore.
So that's new this year.
Yes, for the west side. Yes.
Okay. Because I knew that we had a whole bunch of changes last year, and I just didn't know that there were also changes this year.
Yep. So they changed half the middle schools approximately last year and the rest this year.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Other comments or questions for Renee? Alder Harrington McKinney.
And I don't know if it's in order now, but I see that Alder Tischler is on this discussion, and he was the one that really requested that this topic come before transportation. And I wanted to before I don't know if he has to leave, but
He has his hand. He has his hand up to speak after you're done.
Okay, then I will yield to Alder Tischler.
Okay, thanks, Alder. Go ahead, Alder Tischler.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate bringing this back and having a further discussion. And I guess my question I had for Renee is if anybody from the city has had a recent conversation with the school district about crossing guards, especially at the middle schools. If there's any input from them, and also any potential ideas they have on how to improve crossing guards at middle schools. Given the need, I guess they're the ones made the decision to change the start and stop time of schools.
Sure. So, I don't know if everyone in the school district is aware, but last year we did go to the, what is it called? The school, city, county committee, when the East Sides changed and did a presentation and talked about it. And that does have representatives from the school district and the school board on it. So they were aware at that time when this first came up. And then our school traffic safety committee does have a representative from the safety and security office who was aware of the presentation tonight, is aware of the issue. I know that one of the, what are they called? The assistant superintendent, I believe, is also aware of this issue. They were aware of it, but so they are aware of the concerns and that our program is focused on elementary schools. They were aware of that policy previously.
And I guess I should have been more specific. So, since one of the shifts that from the last time this discussion has come up is that we now have a new school superintendent. I'm wondering if we've heard anything on this topic from him yet.
I have not specifically had any opportunity to discuss things with him or meet with him. I'm not sure if his other staff have raised this up to him or not. That's not a question that I specifically asked them.
Okay. And I guess, and Alderman McKinney, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk or calling on me. I guess I'm wondering, if there's, after the sobering news about the where the city is with finances, but given that we have not changed the crossing guard policy. That last time we revisited it was in 2016. I mean, recognizing that finance money is a big issue here, but would there be any harm in going back and revisiting this document with language saying, if funds are available, that middle school crossing guards could be present at middle school, or at least give us the option to extend those crossing guards who are placed at schools, at elementary schools, the opportunity for us to extend those by, could maybe a half an hour or so, until such time that we can maybe get the school districts, the school district to have bus schedules a little more in sync with those schools that have a joint location for both middle schools and elementary schools. It just seems like not kind of not a tremendous amount of costs. It would also give us the opportunity to respond right away rather than having to keep coming back and having the same conversation over and over.
Renee, Yang, your comments with regard to that?
So I guess, I mean, is the question to just have at one middle school or
I guess the
at
question is
multiple middle schools? I guess I don't really know.
Across the city, just to the policy was based off where the snapshot of where Madison was back in the 1970s. Here we are, at a different time, more people, more traffic. To have the ability to extend crossing guards to middle schools across the board, and then as funding is available, as public will, kind of request this, we would be able to make changes with, and again, something as simple as taking existing crossing guards who are there for elementary schools and just extending their hours. Again, recognizing that we need money and also we need personnel, but at least having those policy in place so we can actually act quickly.
So there might be crossing guards who would be willing to work more hours. We don't have a crossing guard permanently placed yet at Mineral Point and Seago. That is one of our crossing guards who started and quit. So we'll be hiring for that. Many of our crossing guards do have other commitments. So even if we said we will now offer crossing guards who are near middle schools the ability to work longer, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't need to hire people, especially now that the schools are going, that you would have to work past 9 a.m. and you would have to work past 4:25 p.m. So that's a real concern with just saying we could do it with our current staffing.
Yang, go ahead.
Thank you, Anne. I think and thank you, all the teaching of that question. Renee is definitely correct. There's definitely going to be, quite a few challenges of making that happen. We do face, quite limited staff resources. Even though there are, funds available, it will take time for us to put together. Over the last couple of years, we did some very aggressive campaign to get more people interested in signing up for a job. But it's not the most glamorous job out there, and it's hard for for us to do that. But with that said, though, I think the commission and the council can definitely considering different policy, maybe to enable that. And I think we also need the council to act to create some funding for this, and the staff will do whatever we can, trying to make that happen. But I don't think there's guarantee that everything will fall place from staffing perspective. But definitely, if there is will from the community, from the city to do so, we will do our best to try. I think Renee has more thing to add.
Sure, go ahead, Renee.
I just wanted to add something. We're obviously embarking upon this racial equity and social justice initiative, and we're talking about adding a very limited slice of crossing guards potentially. When there are other schools that have never had a crossing guard, that also have crossings that are difficult, that require them to be very aware. I did, take a look at the Wisconsin Bike Fed did some crash maps recently around schools, and it was of people under 18, and a lot of the crashes are high school students. Even near ones that are showing up on the middle school maps when you dig into the crash reports. They're also happening at lunchtime. They're happening, a couple hours after school is out. So I think, that this is a complex issue around safety and how we best provide that with the resources that the city has. and what are those? And then what are the resources perhaps from others that can also help with safety for students who are traveling to and from school. I will say that one positive of the schools being further apart is it does have dispersed school time traffic, so that you don't have all the parents who do choose to drive at the same time, which has lessened some of the, I think, just congestion and frustrations that drivers have at school crossings. So that is something that we've noted as a positive of this change is kind of flattening out the overall traffic at those schools that are adjacent.
What else did you have, Alder Tischler?
Oh, I was just going to say that, it just seems like we're allowing busing to kind of drive the issue in this particular case, which then seems, is those parents, those guardians with means, will then just choose to drive their kids to school, which then the people who are, it's the kids that are suffering are the ones that live closest, so they can't bus. And then maybe they don't, and then the parents aren't able to take the time, and don't have the flexibility with their work schedule or have the means to drive them to and from school. So I just want to I'm just trying to advocate for those, those people who do choose to walk over busing and driving, and that is looking at our priorities. We put pedestrians, bikers first.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if it's a question of money, we're spending a heck of a lot of money on fuel for buses, a heck of a lot of money for roads. And I guess also, we have a lot of, all the extra additional cars that are dropping kids off. That's not very good for the environment. And, so I just wanted to add that. That's why I'm making a lot of attention to all this, is just to advocate for those kids who are walking a short distance, because those should be the priority right here. So that's all. So thanks everybody for at least allowing this conversation to occur.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your comments. Harold, you're next. And if I could just make a comment, one of the attendees who spoke earlier has his hand up, and sir, you already had your 3 minutes. So we, according to our protocol, that was your time, and so now it's the turn of the members of the committee and staff. So Harold, go ahead.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, and I mean, I've been part of these conversations several times, because they do keep coming up whenever the school districts decide to make changes, and so we've been here before. And thank you, Alder Tischler, for articulating this vicious circle of people who don't feel safe walking to school, having their kids walk to school, therefore they drive, therefore it becomes ever unsafer. I mean, I live around the corner from West High, so I see the traffic chaos every morning. So yeah. I wanted to ask a question regarding this staffing issue. I think my takeaway from the presentation, Renee, and correct me if I'm wrong about that. I mean, yes, there's the question of actually having, like, if we were to expand the program to actually having the crossing guards themselves. But I think my takeaway was also, if we want to expand the program, I think you nicely articulated that, I mean, people need to be managed. There is organizational effort, and that's in addition to finding people being out there as crossing guards. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm going to give you an instance of where a crossing guard was called upon late in the day, right towards the end of their shift, was when we had a driver threaten one of our crossing guards because they did not want to stop, and we had to involve the police. And, obviously that was very stressful for the person. And they needed to give a report to the police officer, get the license plate to them so that the police officer could go to the person's home and have a discussion with them about what transpired. and talk to the witnesses, right? These are the realities of being a crossing guard supervisor, is you're called upon to do that stuff. And then, it's not like that happens every day, or we wouldn't have any crossing guards working for us. But, we have sick calls. We have people who get, like there's crash on the Beltline and they can't get to their stop. And they're very stressed about not being there for their community and their families. And we need someone who can handle all those responses. And our crossing guard supervisors are, working a shift that starts at 6 a.m. So they're not still going to be there when these people might say like, oh, actually, I'm not going to make it. So I take that very seriously. We have a responsibility to our staff who work very isolated in the field. They're not that, connected to the city, and we want to be able to be there and respond when they have a need from us. And so I do, this time in this presentation, I wanted to lay out more of what a program might look like. Whereas before I was just like, yeah, there's some additional costs beyond that actual one crossing guard who would be there. So I think, they need our full support. Their jobs are hard. And so they see a lot of things, and they, safety is a problem for them as well. And so we need to be there and have supervision to support that.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. And then I guess the other part is maybe just voicing a concern that, I think, Renee, you mentioned that too. I mean, we don't know. It could well happen that the school district next year, 2 years from now, decides whatever, maybe first student transport doesn't get the contract renewed, and then there's a decision that everything is going to change again, and then the city has to pick up, then we have the same problem again. And whatever the policy we came up with now that makes sense for the current situation may or may not make sense with that future situation. So I mean, this is very frustrating for, I'm sure, parents and people in the public to hear us say like, well, maybe the school district has some responsibility there, but I think that's what it is. I think the school district does have some responsibility, and what that responsibility exactly looks like financially, or having a commitment to like, okay, these school start times are going to remain in place for the next X years, and we can build a program around that. I'm not sure, but I do think it can't be only the city's responsibility to fix this. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Any other comments, Renee or Yang, before we move on to Alder Harrington McKinney? Go ahead, Alder Harrington McKinney. You're next.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, Renee, I want to thank you for going there and expanding your presentation. I mean, the fact that you went there and you opened the door, and also to Alder Tischler for asking that this be on our agenda, and our chair for putting it on the agenda so quickly. And the reason that it's become important to me is that when we talk about an equity issue, and we're talking about those parents who are concerned about the safety of their children, and they have the capacity to drive them from school and make adjustments, hard adjustments in terms of the change of the time. But for those families who don't have that ability, it is an equity issue, and I'm glad that Director Tao is on this call as well. And the reason that this has become very important to me is that I reviewed the crash analysis that was done in my district a couple of about a month ago. And
it was in July, right?
It was in July. And what I realized is that I did not give it the attention that I needed to give the attention. And I went back and because this was on our agenda, I went back and I reread it. And for the crash analysis, there was a fatality, and they talked about how serious the Raymond Road and Prairie roads were. And so this whole issue, even though we don't have any control of what the school district determines, we've got 52 schools, 32 elementary schools, 12 middle schools, 6 high schools. It is an issue that I hear that has come before the Transportation Commission before, and it's something. Director Tao, because we're looking at Safe Streets Madison. And when we're looking at Safe Streets Madison, of course it should include our children. And so I just want to make sure that we're putting this back in front of us, and so that we can be discussing it, but how do we determine what areas are high priority? How can we not just shift this down the road? And so, 3 years down, we'll be talking about the same thing. And so I'm concerned. I don't have children, but I absolutely have talked with parents who are concerned about the well-being and safety of their children. So I wanted to toss it back to you, Director Tao, and kind of give us some steps as what, we could be doing toward this. I'm complete.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Alder Harrington McKinney and I think the Alder brought up some really good point, right? For staff, we are parents as well, and we are neighbors as well, and we do very so much care about the safety of our kids. For the Safe Streets Madison program, the Alder you mentioned, we do place a high emphasis on school areas. So we do prioritize them as we rank the projects, if they are your school areas, and we also prioritize implementation of those projects once they are funded. Maybe I also use the opportunity to respond to, the question from a resident, whether staff has done safety study, for the intersection, before we making change, right? For that question, I will say that, the decision is really not for the staff to make. It's really because the school district changed the timing, and it just does not work according to our policy anymore. So we have covered the middle school for many years because it happens to work out with the primary school schedule. So that's not the change is not because safety has improved at the intersection. It's because those changes by the school, it does not align with the city's program anymore, and we don't have resource to provide those service. And also, really brought up a really good question, right? If we do so for Hamilton School, should we also do it for some other, all the other middle schools as well? So that's definitely an adequate question. But we do take safety very seriously. I think Renee kind of mentioned this. After before this was implemented, after we learned about the change, we did do a lot of study, digging into. Now we lost crossing guards. For that time period, what are things we can do to make the intersection safer? So we definitely look a lot at the crash data, analyze what we can do, make improvements where we can. For example, the no turn on red signing, right? That's one of the things that we're trying. But of course, right, if you don't have a constant enforcement support, it will not be as effective as it could be. Which I think we value that feedback from resident. We can bring this up issue with our partners at the police department. Maybe we can provide more enforcement, so maybe those signs can be more effective. And we're looking at improved lighting, things like that. And we have been working with the schools and providing education. Teaching our kids, how to safely cross street on their own. So we do take this very seriously. We don't we don't want to make the change either. And we're trying the best we can do to mitigate the impact. But we understand that, still going to be impacts out there, for those parents. So we do, we do feel for them. And as I mentioned, we're parents ourselves and we're neighbors ourselves. So we understand the pain. We'll continue to look for things to help, right? If the commission, recommend a council to change the policy, we'll do our best to collaborate on that. If saying if the policy cannot be changed, we'll keep looking for measures that are within our control, such as through the Safe Streets Madison program, to make improvements, to work with the school staff, and hopefully we can promote even more education, for our kids, for them to form a habit. And we can think about doing more campaign with with the drivers, ask them to slow down, be mindful for the for our kids' safety. So we are definitely committed to do whatever we can, within the resources we have, to help residents, because we do understand the pain. So thank you.
Thanks, Yang. Renee, did you have a comment before we go to Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on something I mentioned in my presentation, which is our Safe Routes to School plan. You would have only seen it here as we signed the contract and the agreement for the grant funding. But this project will be something that we'll come here with and will really inform our Safe Streets funding. I mentioned we have funds to do detailed work with about half the schools. That's the funding that we have currently. And we'll be putting together metrics to determine which schools have the highest need for assistance. And with each of those schools, we'll be doing some, public engagement. We'll be doing what they kind of call walk audits at the school, and we'll be figuring out what are the greatest needs to improve safety, to ensure that kids who need to walk and bike and that kids who will want to walk and bike can do that safely. We have not, finalized those metrics, selected the schools, but that is something that we'll be bringing forward. And with that, we'll be bringing forward more requests, more detailed requests for the Safe Streets Madison program. I think this summer we did quite a few projects that were based on some reviews that the School Traffic Safety Committee did, but the committee hasn't had the time to do real deep dives into each school. So we're bringing through just the top one thing that a school needs, right? And this is going to be much more detailed than that. And we're going to be asking you, to be able to support that work as well. So once we just had our first kickoff meeting with us, with the city staff, with the school district, with someone at the school district who's tasked with this project, and with the Bike Fed, who has a program manager. But we'll hopefully have this semester, we'll be ready to come forward to talk more about that work, the metrics that we're going to use for the schools, and what schools you'll see coming forward first with that work. And I think really that's going to be an important tool. We've had since the pandemic, overwhelming requests for school reviews of their safety plans, how their pickup and drop off works, where kids walk and bike, where they're crossing. So that need is high. We have a lot of new principals who are working on this issue. So I think that that's going to be a really critical project for us going forward.
Thanks, Renee. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. Renee, thank you for putting the material in a method to show to people that this is not an easy problem for the city to solve. We are a partner with the schools, but I think, there's having multiple start and end times for the different grades has compounded this to a point where the city cannot solve the problem. I'm really concerned that if the referendum fails, that among the things that will have to be cut that has been proposed is crossing guards. Well, that only makes the problem worse even for elementary school kids. So how are we going to, and okay, somebody's going to say, no, that should be a higher priority. Well, if you keep that funding or add funding for middle schools or some other cross-section of how you're going to, modify the program to do the crossing guards, what is going to get cut? What else? Something else has to be cut. And I think it's only going to be a problem. And this is, we're talking tonight about this one issue. There was 4 pages of things that have to be cut. That's going to rile up everybody in the community to the point that nobody's going to win. And I really concerned. And I totally agree with what Yang's statement about how the city is trying to work with the school and the school district, but this problem is only going to get worse. I mean, it's not just money; it's staffing. It's just these are not easy issues to solve, and I think it's going to become harder and harder. And so I'm totally frustrated. I really am about this because I parents are obviously concerned about their children and how it affects their lives and so forth. But it's not going to be easy. So stay tuned. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Renee, for the presentation. And also thanks to the speaker earlier who showed up to, sort of raise the issue. I think we're faced with this challenging question of where to invest resources all the time. And, we know very well that we can't chase every safety problem with crossing guards, and we have to make these tough choices. And as Yang said, that's why we're investing in Safe Streets projects and all kinds of infrastructure changes so that we don't need crossing guards and so that our crossing guards' job is easier. Renee, you said, even they face, angry drivers sometimes. So I guess I just wanted to make that clear again. And in case there are members of the public, that are listening to this, that's why we're making those improvements in the infrastructure. And anyone who watches the news knows that even those investments, Mineral Point Road investments just a little bit to the east, are upsetting some folks, who think we're making it more difficult to drive. So I hope that folks that are upset about the safety issues that we're trying to resolve also recognize that those types of investments are to address these issues and speak up just as much in favor of those safety improvements.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I don't see any other hands up. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Renee, I reviewed what the detailed presentation that you put together with regard to talking to middle school students and studying their behavior, et cetera, and better understanding their behavior. And it seems to me, and you mentioned today one example where they actually avoided crossing where the crossing guard was. It seems to me that the theme that I heard is that they feel more independent. They want to act more independently. And in my mind, that supports what Yang, Renee, Chris, Harold, others Bill talked about, and that is prioritizing the safety improvements near these schools so that we can make those intersections safer for the students who choose to be more independent and cross. And the other thing you had on that slide, Renee, was the student education. Again, because they see themselves as more independent, we can help them be safer in their independence, along with making those intersections safer. So I can't recall, and I don't recall that we have an actual school factor in our Safe Streets Madison prioritization, even though we do. So perhaps we want to consider formalizing that and, moving forward with your recommendation and what we've all talked about, prioritize the infrastructure improvements to make the intersections nearest our schools safer, and prioritizing with equity first, where we should be looking at those. Does that make sense, Renee? Because that's the theme that I've heard you talking about, is that crossing guards aren't necessarily the answer for middle school students.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, harking back to the presentation I did this summer, we did do a couple of focus groups. And yeah, like some of the kids are like, yeah, I'd still do it. Others are like, I'm an adult. And the thing with a crossing guard is it takes longer to cross the street. Crossing guard goes out. They make sure all the traffic is stopped. When they're like, okay, we're good, they call the students out and tell the students they can cross. They ask the students to walk their bike because, they're on a sidewalk, they're crossing at the crosswalk. They need to not hit each other. They're not all the best bikers. So it is a longer crossing. It takes longer. You have to wait longer. And a lot of the students are like, I know how to do this. I do it by myself when you're not here. And it has caused some problems for us on occasion with students that are like, no thanks. We had one where the kids were like, don't like to do it. We'll just kind of do a diagonal crossing going mid-block, which we don't want them to do that either. We also have no authority over them. We're not their parents or their caregivers. We're not their student. We're not their teachers. So we have had to involve the schools sometimes to be like, when school's in session, can you talk to them about this behavior? So yeah, they are more independent. I was reading crash reports for, youth 18 and under. A lot of it is also happening. The crashes are happening at non-school time. It's a couple hours after school. They're going home from a friend's house, probably. Who knows? They're one of the worst middle school ones was in the parking lot. It happened in the parking lot. We wouldn't have been there even if we had a middle school crossing guard program. There were other ones, that just happen at times that aren't. So we need to build a city that is safe for our middle school kids to walk and bike in, and we need to build a city that our high schoolers can also be safe in, since many of the crash reports are high school age students that are getting hit. We also need that continuum of education so that everyone is learning how to safely walk in elementary school and middle school and, be a bicycle and pedestrian friendly driver, know how to take transit. Those things are important, I think, to a city that wants to be truly walk and bike friendly.
Okay. Thanks, Renee. Alder Govindarajan, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm curious to learn. I mean, we're hearing that it's usually these kids getting hit, but I'm curious who's behind the wheels. Is it high schoolers behind the wheels? Is it like their siblings picking up kids? Like that is, I think, also a very important factor, especially younger drivers in high stress environments in school parking lots during pickup. That was me 5 years ago picking up my sister, and 8 years ago in middle school. This isn't too long ago for me, so I very vividly remember all this. But I think that's important information to have here as well. And yes, we definitely do need to build a safer city, but I think we also need to be much more hyper aware of who exactly is driving around our children in our city as well, because that has just as important of a factor here. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. There have been some high profile teen driver crashes, but they didn't necessarily involve other teens walking and biking. There are some crashes that involve drivers over 65. We do see them slightly overrepresented in walking and biking crashes of all types, unfortunately. And, some are adults. And it's kind of hard to know, right, if they were part of the school community or not. But they were, just your general adult age. And obviously the one that happened in the parking lot, that was, within the school community.
Okay, thanks. Did you have anything else, Alder Govindarajan?
No, that was all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add to what MGR has said, and I wasn't going to jump in because I think everybody has said everything that needs to be said. But many, many, many years ago, I worked with some of the elementary schools in Madison on their pickup and drop off. to make it safer for kids who were crossing the street and for walking to school and things like that. And quite honestly, I was incredibly appalled at the behavior of the parents. They would drop their child off, often not where we had told them to drop their child off, because they didn't want to turn around or they didn't want to have to wait. They would drop their child off and then they would literally run a stop sign where kids were crossing. We had parents that refused. There was school parking lots, which were for teachers, and the teachers were there before the kids got there. And so the parents were not supposed to pull in the parking lot. There were signs, and there were parents that insisted on pulling into those parking lots, even though there were signs, do not use this parking lot, do not pull in here. And a parent behaved very rudely to the principal, who came out and told him not to pull into the parking lot because this parent did it every day. And the parent threatened the principal. Well, it just happened that our chief of police at the time had kids at that school. So the next day, the chief of police drove his kids to school and observed this parent being rude, being inappropriate, and pulled up with his uniform and said, "Don't do that, or I will put you in jail." And that was the end of that. But it's really incredible. A lot of the behavior that we see that makes it unsafe around schools, and this is borne out by studies all over the country, is other parents. They're the ones creating the traffic around the schools, and they often, unfortunately, once their child is safe, they have disregard for the other children, and I don't understand it. But it's true. And then there's just commuters that see the slow school zone signs and disregard them. They just don't pay any attention. And I've talked to crossing guards. I've stood there while the crossing guards are crossing kids and had people go right through when the crossing guard is standing in the middle of the street with a stop sign, go right past them. It's appalling, but it's our culture to just expect to be able to go as fast as you want, whenever you want, wherever you want in your personal vehicle. And it's endemic, and it does not discriminate when there are children present. So, who is it? It's us, all of us. And it's our neighbors and the people we work with and the people who live down the street and the other parents that are taking their kids to the same school. So, yes, Harold mentioned that he lives near West High. He also lives near Randall School. And yes, we have teen drivers going by Randall School because they go to West High and then they drive past Randall School, which is an elementary school a few blocks away. But it's not inexperienced drivers often. It's very experienced drivers. So I'm sad that this is an ongoing problem. But except for having police officers out there giving everybody tickets every single day, it's going to have to be a cultural change. That's what it's going to have to be. But changing the infrastructure so that drivers have to pay more attention, they have to drive more slowly. It's easier for non-drivers to cross the street and to negotiate our public right-of-ways. That is incredibly important, and it's going to inconvenience some people, but it's going to save lives as well. So, end of rant. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks, Robbie. Renee Yang, did you have any other comments before we move on?
I mean, I just want to say most of you probably don't know this, but I was the Wisconsin Safe Routes to School coordinator for many years when the program was new. Bill knows that because we work together. But this is I visited schools all over the state while I had that job, and it was unfortunately it is everywhere from small towns to big cities that school zones and the behavior of the people who are visiting that school is an issue. So it's not us. I talked to coordinators all over the country when I had that job. It's something that everyone was working on to improve kind of the culture and to improve the infrastructure to make it harder to do the behaviors that are unsafe at school areas.
Thanks, Renee. Alder Govindarajan, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm maybe a little bit more of a pessimist, I guess, when it comes to changing people's cultures. So my question is, do we have any MPD officers during school drop-off and pickup hours? And if not, can we get them there to enforce the things that we are seeing? Because Robbie's completely right. Like, I kind of alluded to it when I was picking up my sisters from school 5 years ago. I'd be stressed out as a high schooler driving around picking up my younger sibling. It was not a great experience, and oftentimes I'm not driving next to other high schoolers. I'm driving with other parents who are rushing and breaking the rules and not following the signs. And I've heard from other people here as well, like, the problem seems to be we don't have a lot of authority over both the kids, but also the drivers. So are there police officers there? Can we get that there? That's something I'm very interested in.
Yeah, I mean, Lieutenant Hannah's not here tonight. We have a great relationship with the traffic enforcement safety team, but as you know, they have just one team. It's AM. We have a school rotation. We work closely with them. And if we're seeing particular problems where we need them to come outside of like kind of their rotation through all the schools, they do. But, that's an AM team. Now, we also have good relationships with the districts. And if we need some support, like we're seeing a problem, like Lieutenant Hannah is really great at like connecting us to the right person. But, that is kind of the situation that the regular everyday rotation is the traffic enforcement safety team that's coming through to the schools. And they're an AM team.
Okay, got it. And that is part of MPD?
No, it is. It is. So Lieutenant Hannah oversees that team, and she's the one that comes here to do the traffic safety report. So part of MPD. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and as Bill pointed out, in terms of potential budget reductions or eliminations to balance the budget if the referendum doesn't pass, I believe the test team was part of that, wasn't it, Renee? Yeah. So
that is correct. Yep.
Yeah. So another reason why the referendum passing is really important to preserve all of those important safety services. Yang, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to see that's correct. Yeah, so that's one measure that city would have to cut. If the referendum fails. So yeah, I also want to see that. Thank you to Alder MGR for the for the presentation. I think there was a question asking that whether anything else can be cut instead of the ones on the list. Everything seems so impactful. The Alder is absolutely correct on that. The city has already been doing more with less for many years. I know, I can just speak for my agency, traffic engineering. We have been turning over every stone, trying to find things to cut, and it's a very difficult exercise. So that's challenging. But also maybe want to take the opportunity. If since no one is in the queue, I want to take the opportunity to thank Alder Tichenor, Alder Harrington McKinney, for bringing up the issue to the commission. I want to thank the commission for putting this on the agenda very quickly. And I want to thank the resident, for coming talk about the issue. And I really appreciate Renee and her staff. I want to thank them for spending a lot of time, doing a lot of work. I know that how much care and thought they put into this, and we all know that at the end of the day, it's still going to be disappointing to some of our community members because there really is no good solution. I know how much work and care they put into this. So here I want to see that let's work together on this to do the best we can. Given all the difficulties, right? We'll reach out to the school to see what we can do together with them, we can work with the residents, right? If the residents would like to volunteer for things, we can help facilitate that, and we can work with the council, the commission, prioritize infrastructure improvements around schools, and maybe we can think of creative ways to engage our drivers, maybe change their behavior as best we can. That's I agree with other MGR. That's really a hard thing to do, but we'll give it a try. So I'll see. Let's work together. Let's see what we can do here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. A lot of great discussion and a lot of comments and thoughts for you, Renee, as I know you're working on updating the crossing guard policy and always taking these things into consideration. But beyond the crossing guard policy, looking at improving the infrastructure at the intersections, as well as continuing on with the education, because I think those are really important. I know as an adult crossing the street in my neighborhood, certain streets, people blow through the crosswalk while I'm in the middle of the crosswalk, So I'm right there with you, Alder, as being pessimistic about changing driver behavior. So Renee, you've talked about educating pedestrians so that we recognize that we can't think we're going to necessarily be safe in a crosswalk, even though we should. So anyway, I know that's pessimistic, but I see it a lot in my neighborhood. So any other last thoughts before we move on? Thanks to both Alder Harrington-McKinney and Alder Tischler for asking us to touch on this again. It gives us more information and more things to think about, both with the crossing guard policy and with Safe Streets Madison, and the other project that you're working on, Renee, that reviewing school safety plans as well. So any last comments? Okay, thanks everybody. I'm saving these notes, so. Great. Let's move on to item 4, and I believe, do we have any speakers on item 4, Aiden?
We do
I'm
not.
sorry, item 5. Pardon me, item 5, on Complete Green Streets. Do we have any speakers on item 5? We just finished item 4.
No, we do not.
Okay, thanks. So Renee, we have a working session on Complete Green Streets. We talked about this at the last meeting and figured it was a good opportunity to continue on with some of the things that members thought that we should be discussing further in a working type session.
Yes. So I did put together a quick presentation. It was mostly just to kind of run through how some of this works to refresh everyone, since it's been over 18 months since this was passed, so that you could kind of think about like the thought process that the guide has set up for trade-offs as a lead into your discussion. And then I'm going to take a ton of notes for kind of what you're thinking. So let me just try sharing my screen, and hopefully my computer is going to be. Okay. Let's hold on for a minute. It is here. Okay, let me try. My computer is apparently very unhappy tonight. Oh, here it is. All right. Okay, here we go. So just wanted to run through this because this was approved back in January of 2023. So some of you haven't seen or really thought about maybe the whole process since 2022. So just a quick review. the guide is really supposed to be a way to ensure that our projects are reflecting the priorities and community values that we have established. Also, should improve our safety, our equity, and our resiliency. It's a lot of it is about making trade-offs, which you guys are the most familiar with of anyone, because you're ultimately reviewing and approving projects that have trade-offs. As some of you may remember, we've actually had a complete streets resolution for quite a long time, but it wasn't very prescriptive of what that meant. And it just was very vague. So this is supposed to help us with that. It's something that, we can update regularly, like we are working on right now. So that's kind of the whole point of what we were trying to set up. It's centered, it talks a lot about values, like what our streets should reflect our values. And the things that we heard from the community was this idea of putting people first, the idea of safety, comfort, well-being over speed and convenience was something that the majority of the people supported or could live with. I was actually kind of shocked that some people would not support that, but there was maybe 12% or so of the people who didn't. And the idea that our streets should support community, they should emphasize kind of those local trips versus kind of people just passing through a neighborhood. This idea of supporting local businesses, trips to your neighbors was important. Sustainability, so talking about things like the tree canopy, stormwater, multimodal opportunities, those were all a big part of this. And the idea that everything should center equity, knowing that our street designs have not always done that. Our outcomes around safety have different outcomes for different people in our community. And that we want to turn that on its head and ensure that everyone has equal access to high quality streets and public right of way. So the first thing we did is the equity framework. And this is more about the approach that we take with design to ensure that our neighborhoods are getting invested in, particularly neighborhoods that haven't had those investments. That people are more connected by more different modes. People can access the things they need to. And that when we do make trade-offs, that we're not disproportionately burdening low-income people and people of color, which has historically been an issue throughout the nation as well as here in the city. As I mentioned at our last meeting, this is kind of still a work in progress, and we'll be doing some more work on our Let's Talk Street idea and what our equitable engagement looks like. That's something that the Department of Civil Rights is continuing to work on, and that's something that we'll continue to work on in transportation. And we have some funding to help us continue what was started with Complete and Green Streets. Our modal hierarchy, this was hugely discussed as we went about the process. We did end up with kind of people walking or using mobility devices at the top, followed by transit, bikes, the motor vehicle movement, and then parking. In that process, some of you might remember we talked a lot about the bike placement, the transit placement, and in the end, we left transit in that second tier. We heard a lot during our equity focus groups that people were not opposed to the opportunities around biking, but they just saw the reliance on transit as critical to them. And also that transit isn't on every street, it's on a subsection of streets. And after, kind of getting some of that feedback, most people supported or could live with having transit above biking. But we did discuss that quite a bit. Should they be equal? Is it really a hierarchy if they're on the same tier? Obviously, lots of talk. We had parking equal with movement of vehicles. We took it off for a while. In the end, it felt like it was more important to be explicit that it is at the bottom of this hierarchy, even though it's not a travel mode. It generates a lot of discussion. Better to be upfront and say it's actually not as important as the movement of motor vehicles and goods and services. It is actually at the bottom. So lots of talk about that during the process. So here's kind of how it works as a review for everyone. We have a street type map. So when we've brought projects forward, we'll say, oh, this is an urban avenue or a community connector. And that's kind of a baseline starting place for a project is it a neighborhood yield street? We have a lot of those that come forward. We have a lot of talk about those. And then we have what are called overlays, which are other priorities that I'll talk about. And the street type is kind of the basic framework, and then all of the overlays influence that design. And then we have a bunch of tables that you've all seen in the table that are how you kind of get down to the nitty gritty of an actual street design. So here's the flow chart that we used to talk about this when it was going through the approval process. You basically have your modal hierarchy and your values over here. And they should be influencing everything throughout the whole process. So you get a project and you look to see what kind of street type is it from the ones that we have approved. Then you would look and see what are the other priorities or overlays. And that would help you identify that individual street's design priorities. So then someone who's working on a project is going to start looking at the charts that are within the guide to see, okay, how much space do we need for the various elements? How wide is that curb to curb width? And you would come up with maybe some problems, right? Like maybe that's not going to work. So you got to go back here and then re-look at those design priorities. Okay, what are the trade-offs? Which of these things? Is it on the transit priority network? Is it a tree canopy priority area? And in some instances, maybe this is a truck route. Maybe this is, a national highway system road, and we have to work with WSDOT. And we have to try to work with them on coming up with, these are our priorities. What can we work with here? Ultimately, the thing with Complete Green Streets is there isn't one design, as you all know, because you've seen projects where we've said this meets the guidance, but there's 2 options or 3 options. But all the options should ultimately reflect the modal hierarchy. It should reflect the values that we've set. So that's kind of just a run through of how it works. This is just our aspirational street types. I think this can be a little confusing because you might look at something and say, oh, you say this is a mixed use neighborhood street, but that's not what it looks like. But ultimately, planning is looking at these through the planning process, through their area plans. And this is what aspirationally that street is intended to be. And the job here is to have a street type that fosters kind of what that mixed use or type of land use is. Each of our streets have zones, some for travel, some for what we call the walkway, although it was suggested we call it the walk zone. And then this flex zone that is kind of the one that trips people up because it has a lot of different uses. It includes the terrace, which can have trees, could have cafes, could have bike racks, could have transit stops, but also includes that parking area. So there's various ways that space can be allocated. These are the overlays or other priorities. The equity areas, which we have been talking about expanding beyond this, but this is what it is right now. And these are areas where we have kind of an expanded process in place where we do things a little bit differently and take some new considerations. We haven't done a lot of these. We haven't actually done any projects. The 5 we've done have not been in these areas, but we are also trying to flesh out and make sure that staff fully understand what we're doing when we do this. All right, our transit priority networks, these are all of our routes that have 15-minute frequency. So all of our bus rapid transit routes and a few others are on what we call the transit priority network. And this is areas where if we have trade-offs that need to be made, we're not going to make it in lowering the quality of the transit. That's going to be a priority for us, is to ensure that high quality transit. The All Ages and Abilities Bike Network is the same thing, but for bikes, it's critical connections to create low stress routes for the whole city so that there are not gaps in the route and you can make your full trip on a low stress route. And these are the streets where we would not make trade-offs to lower the quality of the bike facility. Not to say that we aren't still trying to build those high quality bike facilities everywhere, but when there are trade-offs that need to be made and it's on the All Ages and Ability Bike Network, that's not where that trade-off would come from. And then we just have some additional design guidance to help understand what that means on different types and volumes, speeds, streets. We have our tree canopy priority area, which is the areas that have the lower tree canopy. There's something called a tree equity score that helps us kind of understand what the current level is. And so we would look at that. Those are areas where we would not want to have less, say, terrace space for trees. All right, sorry about that. I lost my computer is definitely having problems. I lost my whole thing, just locked up. So let me try again from the current slide. Sorry, should not have hit that. Okay, I'm just going to try again. I'm almost done. Okay, I was at trees. I was talking about trees. Okay, there we go. So we're really trying to increase that tree canopy. So these are areas where we really want to get 8 foot minimum. Hopefully,
I'm not, Renee, I'm not seeing your presentation.
Oh, well, all right. Let me hit share again. Go back to it. Okay, can you see something now?
It's coming. There we go.
Okay. Let's go. Let's go. All right, hopefully I'm almost done here. Okay. Can you see a full screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, and there's other solutions related to tree canopy, like the suspended soil systems. When might you do that? So really just trying to really know the areas where getting the tree canopy is critical. Now, that doesn't mean we don't want to enhance it or ensure that we're not having a negative impact, but these are those areas where we absolutely need to get more tree canopy for reasons of equity. We also have a flow chart that just helps kind of guide how to make good decisions around green infrastructure. We want to put it in where it actually works. And there's a lot that goes into that. Soil types, is it on salt roads, things like that. So this is just a flow chart for staff to kind of understand how you would think about it. What do you need to know to make the right solutions, to make good investments? You're all pretty familiar with the national highway system, truck routes. These are maybe not things that may be in conflict with some of what we want to do, but they're realities for projects because we have to work with the Wisconsin DOT. We need to ensure that if we're saying it's a truck route, that it actually works for that purpose. So these are just things that we're more aware of for projects. So this is just how that works again. You got your street type. You figure out which of those things apply. You work through your trade-offs, and you're still trying to meet those values that we set. All right. Yeah, so that's all I prepared since our last meeting for the working session, just kind of to run you through everything and make it fresh as you kind of think about some of the issues that we've grappled with recently since this was approved and some of the things that we talked about last time. So I'm going to hand it back to Anne.
Okay, and one of the things that we talked about specifically was looking again at the modal hierarchy and the overlay priorities, how they interact, how that works. Do we need to relook at anything? And that's why we have those specifically identified on the agenda as the areas where we wanted to maybe spend a little bit more time talking about it. One thing that was brought up in relation to trees, how do you balance what's more important? The conversation we had when we talked about the Mineral Point widened sidewalk project, we had significant discussion about that. So that's why we brought it back, because it was fresh in everybody's mind, and we determined we wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about those things. So comments or questions? Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I know I raised some questions last time. It's just helpful to get a walkthrough of the process again because it was a good refresher for me. I guess one of the things I'm still wrestling with is whether the transit overlay and the hierarchy that puts transit above cycling are whether they're redundant and how they sort of interact with each other. Because if there's a bus on the road, then it is by definition part of the transit priority area, and so it would get priority anyway. Have you seen an example where the transit overlay helps more than the hierarchy would by itself?
I think that's a good question. I mean, the transit priority is only the 15-minute service buses, so there are plenty of 30-minute service buses that wouldn't be on there. It's so I'm trying to think if we've done a project so far that kind of had that, and we haven't, but I guess, like the modal hierarchy is maybe more like I don't know, a big picture kind of thing that people can see, whereas the transit priority network is more like the nuts and bolts that the staff uses. But if we had 15-minute service for all of our routes, then it would be somewhat, right? It'd be like a different thing.
So, Chris, is your question, do we need to have a transit overlay?
Yeah, I guess. Or I feel like either we don't need the transit overlay or biking and transit could be on the same tier of the hierarchy, which I don't know that I'm arguing for. So maybe your answer that the hierarchy is more big picture makes sense. But I'm just going to noodle that over a little more.
Okay. Did you have anything else at this moment, Chris?
I guess I'll throw in one more. Sorry, Robbie. I guess I'm wondering about the tree question because we've had cases at Mineral Point Road, I think, where we were trying to weigh the trade-offs of trees, bike lanes, and Robbie pointed out then that the reason we were weighing that trade-off between trees and bike facilities was because we could not give up any road capacity. So I guess I'm kind of wondering if it's worth discussing where trees fall on the hierarchy, and whether they should be put, in the same level of parking, and what a canopy overlay the implications of that would be. So that's just one. I don't know whether I have an answer, but that's something I'm thinking about right now. Maybe Robbie,
and Chris, you mentioned, you called it interaction last time, and I think that's important because we have the modal hierarchy over here and we have the overlays over here. So how does that work? Does it say the overlays more important or what?
Right. So that would, in theory, the canopy overlay would help address that question. But looking at the tree equity map, that stretch of road that we were discussing, I think is also in a high need tree canopy area. So I don't know that it would have helped if we said this is a canopy priority area. therefore trees are more important than bikes. I'm not sure that's, what we were looking for. So I think it's tricky in that case.
Any comments, Renee, or just listening?
Yeah. I mean, I do have some memories, like this did come up with the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, and it's a tricky one, right? And I think that it probably was left off because it's difficult, but also because they were saying, like, first the modes, the safety, right? But and on projects where when push comes to shove, you don't have room for everything. But
Yeah,
that maybe wasn't reality, when it comes to the project level. That becomes harder to do, especially when you're not specific about it.
Yeah, it's a good question for us to talk about. Is that all for now, Chris? Okay, Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah. So as far as the green infrastructure, that's not necessarily certain streets having a green infrastructure priority in the same way that a bike or transit or tree priority area. Is it? I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm asking that as a question.
No, that's a good question. There could be instances, it could impact planting a tree. Certain kinds of green infrastructure might, like a rain garden has some limitations over trees. Thinking about some of the permeable pavement, you might you do it in a way that doesn't have a negative impact based on, like, if it's in a parking lane, then it's generally like, okay, that's like going to be okay. But it is very situational. So it can have some impacts depending on the type that you're doing. I mean, like if you do a pervious sidewalk, it looks the same as a sidewalk. So it doesn't necessarily have impacts on having one.
I guess I just wasn't entirely sure how that fit into our, modal hierarchy and priority decisions, and what exactly counted as green infrastructure, and whether we also count things like, I mean, not to bring up a sore subject, but greenways that are flood issues. I mean, I guess that's not a road. So that's not under our purview. I'm just trying to figure out sort of where the green infrastructure fits into all of this.
Yeah. So I think the green infrastructure is in this modal hierarchy because of the idea of trying to make smart investments in green infrastructure and put them in places that matter because we have a limited budget. But it's important for sustainability. So is it really a trade-off? With trees, certain things, like you place your trees appropriately to your green infrastructure if it's certain types. But I feel like that's a really good question, right? Like, is it really an overlay, or is it we should be evaluating it? And it's not necessarily such a huge trade-off to the other things because you often can do them anyway.
Okay. I wasn't sure where it all fit in. And that's why I was kind of asking whether, where. And, again, do trees count as green infrastructure, I guess, too? We could have a bump out with green infrastructure. Last meeting we talked about fire lanes or the need to have a certain width. And I asked, does it have to be that width the entire block, or can we have bump outs? So I think that's where some of this thought came in. is it mixed in with other street types, or is it its own street type? I was just a little confused on that. The tree priority areas, I thought you said something about evaluating it with regard to equity and where there are not trees now, or did I misinterpret what you had said? In other words, certain parts of the city have fewer trees, and so we're making roads in that area, prioritizing a canopy because they don't have other green areas or other tree canopy areas. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the primary thing that we look at, not the only thing, but is the tree equity score, which is a national kind of thing. And it just looks at the overall canopy. It doesn't look just at like the public right of way. That's just looking at the overall of a neighborhood. So you might have some areas that just have tons of private trees, right? And might have a higher score, even though maybe they have lower, public right of way trees. Or you have an area like West Town Mall that is basically a building and a sea of asphalt parking lots, and they're going to have a low score because that's what it is. Even if we have a ton of trees already, it might still have a very low score overall for that general area because of that. So, it's not like, so it's a broad brush, but in those areas that have a very low score, we're saying we want to bring that up. And the way we can do it is in the public right of way. So we're trying to get that 8-foot minimum terrace that would allow a tree that can be a true canopy tree to be put in the public right of way so that we can do something about it.
Okay. So the tree equity score is not necessarily a income or racial equity issue. It's a overall canopy issue for that area of town.
Yeah. I mean, definitely you look at it and, some areas that, are income or racially based are on there, but also there are areas that are like near a mall that just have a low score because of the nature of the development in that area.
Okay. And also a lot of very new areas essentially don't have any trees because they were cornfields just a few years ago. Yeah. Right.
But the idea is hopefully those are going to turn around naturally because there were trees in the development too. But yes, they could score low if it used to be a cornfield.
Okay. Okay. I think, I just had questions, but thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Alder Tischler, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you. I don't mean to take up all of your time tonight, but I did was hanging around. One of the advantages that downtown Alders have is that they have all their power lines are buried, their utility lines are buried, so you can get a much richer canopy. And I guess my question is for the green streets and where we do make significant investments, in the road and maybe putting in porous pavement and other amenities. Can we also place a priority on having our utility companies and I guess to bury the power lines, bury the utility lines, so that we can allow trees to grow to their full maturity and not have to butcher them later on? So it might be already in there, and if it is, my apologies.
So we definitely don't cover how to make a decision about undergrounding of utilities. That's definitely not my area of expertise. I've only worked on one project where that was taken up, and I do know it did require a great deal of money to make that happen.
That's true. But if we do that as long as we're making improvements into an area, then like I said, if we're doing street repair or widening a bike path, things like that, this is a prime opportunity to also go in there and work with the utilities to bury the lines. And that allows us to have, again, the trees can grow to their full maturity, because otherwise we're planting trees and eventually we're going to have to chop off half the branches. So.
Yeah, no, I know that's a issue of importance. I know, right? Like I have a tree that's all hacked up for the power line by my house. So I don't know. I guess I will throw that back to others. Obviously it would probably reduce the number I mean, I don't know I actually would have to ask Jim Wolf what the cost split is on this, because I'm not totally familiar with like, what does the city pay? What does a utility pay? What does a resident pay? So I definitely need to check with him, but I can make that note. Depending on what the city has to pay, I mean, that could just decrease the number of projects, but that could be a factor that, we would have a consideration in certain instances that we think that should be on the table. So I will throw it back for your thoughts, but I'll note that I need to ask Jim more about the cost share.
Okay. Good question. Anything else, Alder Tischler? No?
No, just in that, if, by burying the power lines, we also, with all the more severity in weather, we'll make it neighborhoods a bit safer, less chances of trees downing power lines, communication lines. So that is something to also to consider. We people going without heat or air conditioning. Some populations are more vulnerable than others. So that's all. And I will not talk anymore tonight. So thank you, everybody.
No, that's okay. Appreciate your input. Thanks. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I also appreciate the input and getting the ball thrown back on undergrounding utilities. I think undergrounding utilities also help sometimes with making the flex zone, yes, that's what we're calling it, more usable for other purposes. I'm not sure if that's the project that you were thinking of, Renee, but on University Avenue, where we also had a lot of discussions on should there be a bike lane, should there be a transit lane. This was before Complete Green Streets, but I know in the end, somehow we managed to underground the utilities, which took away the poles, which otherwise would have been in the way of the widened sidewalk. So I think, that's another potential advantage to undergrounding. But it's my understanding, from what I gather from being on Board of Public Works, that yes, it's complicated and expensive. Coming back to the tree priority areas. So I see there seems to be a fundamental difference in that, as you described, Renee, these priority areas are not at the level of a specific street, they're at the level of a census block group. And so what I'm trying to, and as you then pointed out, a consequence of that is we can plant trees along streets, but it actually will not make any difference to the score. Just because the mall is next to it or a Wisdot freeway interchange is part of that block. And therefore, what we do is at least not changing the score. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference, but it does not change the score. And alternatively, I think this also opens up the opportunity to think about if we think that the tree equity score is a good metric, then we can also think about when we have a street reconstruction project coming up to think about it's a difficult trade-off to make. We might not have space for trees here, but however, there's a parallel road that's lacking street trees right now that has a terrace, and for whatever reason, because of power lines, there are not as many street trees as there should be. Or there's maybe a park where we can change the parking lot to add more, whatever. Basically thinking about other measures to get to our desired outcome, which is improved tree canopy in the area rather than on the specific street, rather than planting what often amounts to 20 trees, which is not going to move the needle and require some of the trade-offs that we've been making. I'm not sure how others think about that, but it does seem to be different where the bike priority network, the transit priority overlay, that's along streets. That's only, you can't fix that you can't build a bike lane sometimes you can build a bike lane that's on a parallel street if there's no parallel street. But with the tree equity score, if we think that's the right metric, I think that seems like a possibility that we could consider.
Any comments, Renee?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like an offset. You can't do it here. You need it, so you got to do it somewhere nearby, right? And I don't know. I can ask Ian. He's off coaching some kids soccer classes. But I can ask him, like, is there a point, where we're going to have as a city, maybe a finer grained tool available? I don't know if there's any work on like developing some sort of better tool that we could use in the city, but I can definitely ask him about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I'm going to anticipate what he's going to say is that, I mean, yes, it is a good measure, but there is actually specific value in having, like, if you have a wide roadway and you have trees over it, I mean, yes, there's like the CO2 absorption, and for that, it doesn't matter where the tree is. But for some of the heat effects, I think at the last meeting, we talked about if there's a bus stop, if you have a shade tree, that's an amazing benefit. So maybe the issue is more that, yeah, the tree equity area only tells you part of the story and is only part of the metric. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I'll definitely raise that with him. I mean, I think it is a thing, we talked about bus stops and the value of having a tree for the shade there. But I mean, I think we all know that if you're walking or biking, the value of a location that has good trees versus not, especially in a time of climate change, right? So it's tricky because you do want to have the trees where those facilities exist as well, and the whole heat island effect. So it is an interesting question, but definitely something I'll raise with Ian.
Okay, other comments or questions? I have a couple comments. We talked about the interaction between the overlays and the hierarchy, and one of the things that struck me as I was reviewing this again, and great refresh, Renee, was the idea of centering equity and the city's definition of equity, and we always need to be thinking about equity. So I guess in my mind, I'm sort of thinking that equity is a guiding principle, is how I'm thinking about it, that we should be thinking about before we even start looking at the modal hierarchy or any kind of overlays. But, that was just something I wanted to raise and get people's thoughts about in terms of how things interact. I wondered if we should be ranking the overlay priorities to try and give them some hierarchy of importance. I'm really wondering if we do need a transit overlay. I don't recall us ever talking about the transit overlay. Does anybody remember us talking about the transit overlay as we're making street decisions? The priority in the hierarchy is, we see that and we understand and value the importance of transit, but I just don't recall us using the overlay in any of our decisions. So something else to talk about. And we talk a lot about pedestrians and bicyclists being the most vulnerable users of our transportation network. And we talk about that a lot, all the time when we're making decisions. And because of that, putting people first, that again, guiding principle that you talked about at the beginning, I really wonder if we should be talking about bringing bicycles up in the same level with transit, which I know was talked about at the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, because we talk so much about the importance of putting pedestrians and bicyclists' safety first, because they are much more vulnerable than somebody inside of a vehicle or inside of a bus. Understanding at the same time the critical role that transit serves in our community, which is why I think people were talking about maybe putting them at the same level rather than putting bicycles second and transit third. But again, I know it's an important discussion. We've talked a lot about it in the past, but I just want to bring up that, I can't get it out of my head. Pedestrians and bicyclists are the most vulnerable users of our transportation system. And is that reflected in our modal hierarchy? So anyway, those are my thoughts. Robbie?
Yeah, you asked if we had ever discussed sort of the transit priority area. And I think we did talk about it. Maybe I'm just thinking about the TPPB discussion about it. I don't know, but there are a couple of places where we've had to make a decision on transit over bicycling, and that is, for instance, East Washington. We removed bike lanes on East Washington. And it looks like we're having that same discussion on certain parts of Park Street for the next phase of the BRT. And I could certainly see this discussion happening, on other high capacity transit corridors where we were trying to decide which is more important. And, I completely agree with you that pedestrians and bicyclists are definitely the most vulnerable, and they definitely need facilities and protection. At the same time, I think the question arises, and I hope this doesn't get me kicked off of my, bike standing, that does transit serve more people? So we are not the only city that has had this discussion. I think that the priority, the hierarchy has come up in other places, and where bicyclists fit in relation to transit is often a sticking point or a long discussion or something that the city has to make a decision on. Some cities have put them on the same level. But then if you do have to prioritize one over the other, what do you do? I think, again, bringing back the same thing I said about Mineral Point Road and that Chris brought up again, these issues really only come up because we are still making it, because we cannot take space away from cars. If long ago in my transportation learning, someone talked to me about we currently build from the center line out. We build capacity for drivers, and then we decide if there's any space left for park benches and trees and people walking and bike lanes and other amenities. But first we decide what our capacity is for people driving. And he suggested we should be building from the building face in. So first we prioritize people walking, the amenities, the bike lanes, the transit stops, and if there's any space left, then the drivers can have that. So, but I think that a lot of the places we're having to make this decision are ones where we don't get to make the final decision. WSDOT gets to make the final decision. Because that's where we put our high capacity transit lines. And so there is still a conflict that we are not allowed as a city to make a decision how we're going to use our right of way, because we're not allowed to reduce driving capacity in favor of trees, bike lanes, park benches, wider sidewalks, cafes, bike parking in the street. Or any of the other things that we might want to put there. So, but it's not that we've never talked about it or that it's never come up. I think that the larger and longer discussion was probably at the TPPB before that was dissolved. So that's it.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Couple thoughts on let's start with, should bikes be higher than transit or not? Renee, feel free to chime in if you disagree with this assessment. I don't think it would make any practical difference. In cases where we do have that conflict for the reasons that Robbie described, where there's not enough space, we, for some reason, decide to maintain car capacity, and then we have to like fight over the scraps of like what does transit get, what bikes get. Those are generally going to be big reconstruction projects, and I think yes, the design will be informed by the priorities, but in the end, it's going to come down to us as the Transportation Commission and often to the council, I believe, to like ultimately make a decision on those trade-offs. And I think flipping those two, I don't think that's going to really change the outcomes of that process. I'm happy to be corrected by Renee or other people on the commission. That's what I'm thinking. The reason why the bus priority network could be helpful is that I think looking at that map right now, where do we have frequent transit? I think Metro, with their new technology system, hopefully will be in a position to do better data gathering of like where are buses being slowed down by other traffic. Where do we have streets where there currently are multiple lanes of traffic, and without doing any reconstruction, we can paint one of those lanes red and make them a bus lane? I mean, I see, for example, Monroe is on here. Does Monroe need a queue jump or like short stretches of bike lane that we could implement without having to do a major reconstruction, where then, as I said, like maybe there it's less useful to have this bus priority network as part of the complete green streets policy, because we're going to have more of a negotiation about that anyway. And then the other thing with the bus network where it could be useful going forward, I know at the beginning of the meeting we authorized the update of the all ages and all abilities bike network planning effort, which is going to get into the complete green streets guide. And so I think that's just something during that process we should keep in mind as we talk about that network and the transit network, and see like where's there overlap where we have a street. I guess thinking in general, like where do these overlays have the same streets on them, where we have a high traffic street that needs a bus lane that is part of the all ages and abilities bike network, and that can then either lead to being prepared for those conflicts, or maybe thinking about like, well, is there an alternative way for the all ages and abilities network? So I think just keeping that in mind. All right, I think that's it.
Okay, Renee, any comments before we move on?
No, I mean, I think I would agree. Harold's right. Like if we have them on the same level, we still have to deal with the issue, and we're probably going to say, well, it has to be transit because it can't go. It has to be there, right? Like it doesn't have always so many options for where it could go to. So does it really need to change? Probably not, because we'll probably make the same decision.
Yeah, similar conversation that I recall listening to a Transportation Policy and Planning Board. So just good to revisit, I think. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This has been a very interesting conversation, and so often for self-disclosure, I'm pretty open. Is that growing, and so I center on the equity piece all the time. And growing up, I did not have a bike. We couldn't afford a bike. And so when I became an adult, that's the first thing I did. I went out and bought a bike because I wanted to learn how to ride a bike. And my bike is in my garage. And so, Robbie, I invite you to help me to learn how to ride a bike. And I add that for self-disclosure, because when we're talking about equity, and I look from, I use my car as my primary sense of modality. That's what I use, where I go from point A to point B. And sometimes I'm listening, and I feel at a disadvantage because I know that Madison and the bikeability is very strong, and the advocacy for biking is very strong in Madison. But what I'm also now looking at is to make sure of all modalities, because I recently had my knee replacement, and I'm realizing how difficult it is to navigate some streets, some locations, and some because I am using a walker. And so I'm not driving. And so, so how do we incorporate in making sure that we are looking at the different modalities? We're looking at where cars fit. We're looking at where bicyclists fit, and we're looking at, where people with different forms of modality. And so I just don't want to get lost. Sometimes I feel like I'm kind of lost on this body, but this was a good conversation because I felt more inclusive, because I understood the parameters of where each one's fit. And I think that they fit in conjunction. I know driving, as I'm driving on the streets, I'm looking at the road diets, and I'm looking at all of those things, and I'm becoming more aware. I used to just get in my car and go, but because of being on this body, I am actually looking at and being aware of how systems are intertwined and how we move across the city. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there in terms of my personal observation. Is not where I was then, but where I am now, and how critically important this body is to look at all forms of modalities and how we share the road with some kind of equity. So I just needed to kind of put that out there, and thank you for the information and the knowledge that I'm gaining. I'm complete.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've covered a lot of the same ground that the Transportation Policy and Planning Board did, and I think that's good because we're revisiting, aren't we, Renee? 18 months after we started using it, and thinking about new things. Underground utilities. My utilities at my house are above ground, and my neighbor across the street, and they're a pain because of many issues with the trees and stuff. And my neighbor across the street, they're below ground, underground, and we don't know why. So interesting thing that we didn't talk about, but great conversation. Renee, I think hopefully this is what you were looking for in terms of maybe validating some of where we are. Anything that anybody wants to leave Renee with in terms of follow-up relative to things that we've talked about, other than some of the things that have been identified already? Renee, anything that you want to have questions about?
I don't necessarily. I have some good notes and some things both from the previous meeting and this one. And I think I'm going to I feel like I'm still on the agenda for the Board of Public Works next week to talk about some things.
Okay.
And so I think after that, I'll try to put this all together and then, come back later to actually, get to the point where we decide which are the changes that we do want to make or additions that we want to make based on the discussion at the last meeting and this one, and then whatever comes up at the Board of Public Works.
Yeah, I think a lot of our conversation validated some of the decisions that were made by the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, but I think it's good to revisit them and to better understand how to use the guide, particularly the interaction between the modal hierarchy and the overlays, because I think that's still something that may not be entirely clear to me. So other comments or questions? We'll clearly have another opportunity to talk about it. Okay. Thanks, Renee. Excellent work as usual. So Tom and Aiden, I think, worked on the schedule. Maybe Aiden worked more on this, item 6, the preliminary review of the 2025 TC meeting dates. Hopefully everybody had a chance to look at it. We have 22 meetings scheduled for 2025 on this preliminary review, only one in September and only one in December. In 2024, we had 20 on the schedule, and we did end up canceling 2 of those meetings so far. And the same would be true in 2025. If we don't feel we need to have a meeting, we would recommend canceling it. Our highest priority is to try and avoid conflicts with the Board of Public Works due to the significant overlap that we have between staff and members, et cetera, between the Board of Public Works and the Transportation Commission. Due to the Board of Public Works schedule, TC needed to move to the first Wednesday of the month for, I think it's 5 meetings. But as a result of the scheduling, we ended up with only 2 potential conflicts with the Board of Public Works. And actually, that's because I asked that we add 2 more potential meetings to the schedule just to be there if we need them. So if we don't need them, we would certainly go ahead and cancel them. And in 2024, there were 3 conflicts with the Board of Public Works. So 2 is better than what we've had in the past. And if we don't need the additional meeting, we would go ahead and cancel it. But it's much, much harder to try and get this group together if it's not already on the schedule. So better, I think, to have it on the schedule. The downside is that the MPO Policy Board, they haven't published their schedule for 2025, but typically they meet the first Wednesday of the month. So that does give us some conflicts with the MPO Policy Board, but I think there's less staff and member conflict with that than there is with Board of Public Works. So presenting this to you for discussion, we can bring it back at the next meeting for review and approval unless you're comfortable with it as proposed, in which case we certainly could approve it tonight. So comments or questions about the schedule? And Aiden, thanks he did a lot of work pulling up the Common Council, all the holidays, all the competing meetings schedules that we have. So thanks very much, Aiden, for your work helping put that together. So comments, questions, thoughts? I know it's late. Are people comfortable with this? Are there changes that you would like us to try and work around? I would tell you this, that, as Aiden was trying to look at different options, the way the holiday calendars fell this year caused us to have some not great options in certain months. So I think September was the big one where we ended up with just 1 meeting in September because there just wasn't another option. Harold.
I'll just move that we approve this meeting calendar.
Okay. Bill?
I'll second that motion.
Discussion. Oh, did you wish to speak on your motion, Harold?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any discussion about the schedule? Alder Harrington McKinney.
Just a question. For last month, there was a conflict where the policy board met at the same time as the Transportation Commission. And so for those of us who served on both of those bodies, it was a conflict. Was that unusual? Is that something that we should not be running into in the future and we can or cannot plan for?
So it was unusual in 2024. In 2025, the Board of Public Works had their meetings on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday in several months, which was a little unusual. And I think the Board of Public Works has certain deadlines that they have to meet. If I'm correct, Harold, in terms of how they have to schedule meetings, maybe I'm wrong. I thought Chris told me that. But in any event, their schedule was set. And so in order for us to not conflict with Board of Public Works, we needed to schedule some meetings in 2025 on the first Wednesdays of the month. And that does put us in conflict with the MPO Policy Board, but when we look at the staff that consistently comes and makes presentations at TC and Board of Public Works, there's a lot of, and we have one member on Board of Public Works and one member on the MPO Policy Board, but staff is the big consideration because there's a lot of staff. And Yang, I think you can speak to that perhaps. There's a lot of staff that has to go to Board of Public Works and has to go to the Transportation Commission. So it's very difficult for staff if we have meetings on the same night. And we have to try and work around that. Yang, is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think, between the public works and board of the MPO board, we definitely have much more overlap on the board of public works. So for staff perspective, it's much more important to avoid conflict with BPW than with the board of the MPO, which is not ideal, but hopefully the conflict will be smaller.
Yeah, it's very difficult, Alder, because we have conflicts on the one hand or conflicts on the other hand, and we just don't have anywhere else to go with it. So it's unfortunate.
That was a good explanation. I understand now. Thank you.
Yeah, Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, just one suggestion, maybe since the MPO policy board starts at 6:30, maybe when planning agendas for the meetings where there are those conflicts, maybe just taking that into account in terms of how much we put on the agenda. I mean, we're never done by 6:30, but
sure,
maybe we can be more mindful of that.
Sure, absolutely. And we do try very hard to put the action items first on the agenda so that we can get through the action items before that 6:30. So we'll certainly keep that in mind. And it's helpful to have this schedule format so that I can be reminded of when the council meetings are, when the MPO policy board meetings are, when the Board of Public Works meetings are. Sometimes we even throw the Plan Commission on here because that's helpful too. So, yeah, that's a great point, Harold, and we'll certainly do that. Any other comments or discussion? Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. Okay, the motion is carried, so we don't have to bring it back again. That's helpful for our scheduling. So let's move on to item 7. Any updates from TC members who are members of other transportation-related BCCs? Anything tonight? Alder Harrington McKinney?
Briefly, it became an issue because there was a quorum issue on both sides at the last month. So that was the conflict. It had not been a conflict before. I just wanted to make note.
Okay. Okay.
So I think that there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of discussion related to supporting the Regional Transportation Authority. And so I think that was tabled because that discussion, so that was put out by one of the other alders, but there was a lengthy discussion about the Regional Transportation Authority and also highlighting the supporting the American walk, the week without driving. They MPO supported that, a week without driving, and released a draft of the 2024-2028 public transit plan.
Okay.
So
yeah, I just got something from Ben Lyman that I'm going to forward to Aiden to send to all of you with regard to a transit plan so that everybody can have an opportunity. And you'll have to let me know if you want it to come here to TC for discussion, or you want to just provide individual feedback to him. So thanks, Alder. That's very helpful. Anything else from MPO Policy Board?
No, that's a summary of it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Any other comments from members? No? Okay. Then we'll move on to item 8. The mayor's reappointment for Bill to a 1-year term as second alternate and Harold to a 3-year term as a resident member were confirmed at the Common Council on September 10th. So yay. We still have 1 vacancy at the moment. So we'll keep you posted on any other movement that I hear about. So that's all I had as announcements. In terms of future agenda items, I have quite a number of things that we're looking at potentially for the October 16th meeting. And coincidentally, Alder Harrington McKinney and I have a start of an email response, but I ran out of time because of the meeting tonight with regard to the Prairie Road, Raymond Road intersection that was the subject of the Strong Towns Crash Analysis Studio back on July 19th. Staff has been working on that and may potentially come to TC for discussion on October 16th. So, yeah, that's something we've talked about at our agenda meetings, and I've been in contact with Yang and Renee about. So any other items that people, and TDM is coming, which I think you've all heard about, the ordinance. Ordinance changes are going to Plan Commission and then coming to TC, and then also we'll be looking at the updates to the policy, TDM policy manual as well. And a few other things too. Any future agenda items that we don't have on here, Harold?
Yeah, news today came out that B-Cycle has been sold to a new owner.
Oh, no kidding. That was today?
A couple hours ago, I saw the news about it. So that is very fresh still. So I leave it to city staff, but it sounds like that might be something that we would want to get an update from staff and or B-Cycle sometime soon to have an understanding if that has any impact on the system. And yeah, especially since, yeah.
I had not heard that, but coincidentally, again, or not, the B-Cycle update, which we had sort of pushed off because of timing, is scheduled for October 16th. So we'll see if, yeah, so very timely if in light of the news on sale of ownership or change in ownership. So we'd be talking about that at the next TC agenda meeting. So I'll email Renee after the meeting, Harold, and ask her if that impacts when Helen Bradley would be coming to talk to us or not. But yeah, excellent topic. So definitely want an update about that. So hopefully we can push for having that on October 16th because we haven't had it. I mean, normally we would have had an update already from them in terms of last year and what's been happening. So I'll look to see if we can have it. I think she was going to be out of town. Otherwise, we would have had it today. And wouldn't that have been interesting? Have her here today. So thanks for letting me know. I'll look for that article and talk to Renee about that. Other items for future agenda topics. Okay, then we need a motion to adjourn. Carl?
So moved.
Robbie?
Second.
Okay. The motion and a second. I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. Nobody's ever done that, so I'm assuming not. Thanks for another great discussion and appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.